Chapter 481, Source of Pollution. Saul stood in the stairwell, watching the girl bound at the wrists, ankles, and mouth, convulsing in struggle. As she struggled, her skin began to crack open bit by bit, revealing the black stains underneath. Tiny black particles trickled down from the cracks in her skin, falling to the floor and quickly gathering into a small pile of pointed ash. Saul, peering through the crack of the stairwell door, saw the man inside return to his room. Only then did he signal little Algie to continue helping the girl upstairs. From time to time, someone would pass by Saul and the girl in the stairwell, but none of them noticed anyone else walking nearby. Saul followed the staircase all the way to the top floor, his temporary residence. By the time they arrived, the girl's skin had split and deformed severely from her struggles. Her entire body had all but turned into a charred lump of coal. She looked like a scorched corpse. Master, Agu and Morden came up to greet him. They took the girl from little Algie's hands and easily restrained her, trapping her within a magic formation. Next to that formation were 5 others, each containing wraiths Saul had previously brought back during his tasks as a cleaner. The charcoal girl became the 6th. Never expected Penny to be out and about every day without finding a single wraith, and yet one was just born right downstairs. Little Algie shook the ash off its body, then panted slightly as it slithered close to Saul. Saul reached out and scratched under its chin. "This was your achievement." Little Algie twisted its body happily, like a dancing snake. Saul looked at the unmoving, blackened corpse within the formation. He had encountered such charred remains once before, not long ago. That wraith had been taken away by Kent, who was in charge of task logistics at the time. Saul hadn't stepped forward back then since others were present. He hadn't earned much from that mission, just a few magic crystals. But he had paid close attention to the wraith's traits. If he found a similar one later, he could exchange magic crystals or other magic materials for it. Over the past few days, he had accumulated quite a few wraiths this way, which was how he came to realize the one he just obtained was identical to the one Kent had taken before. Saul stored away the wraith. It wasn't particularly useful, then set off for Baton Academy. All of these were things he had discovered openly. Others might have noticed too, so reporting it to the dean wouldn't seem out of place. But on his way to the academy, he unexpectedly ran into Julie. Her face was grim, and she too was heading toward the academy. "Saul," Julie's face brightened into a smile when she saw him. "What a coincidence, running into you again today. Are you still looking to trade for wraiths?" Saul's tendency to gather newly born wraiths during missions and exchange them with others was no longer a secret. Some wizards, knowing he had rare magic materials, even sought him out to trade. Saul looked at Julie and got straight to the point. "Recently, I've encountered a newly born wraith type. They all share the same characteristics, but they appear far apart from one another, so I suspect a new pollution source may have emerged." In Kaugus City, wraiths usually appeared alone, typically transformed from ordinary people or soul-bearers exposed to magical or mental force far beyond their tolerance. But on rare occasions, multiple similar wraiths would appear at once. That usually indicated the presence of a pollution source extremely dangerous to ordinary people. If not eradicated, the same type of wraiths would continue to emerge endlessly. While these wraiths weren't especially powerful, they were lethal enough to ordinary folk. And since many industries in Kaugus City relied on ordinary labor, any pollution source that caused mass casualties needed to be dealt with swiftly. Those who reported a pollution source would be given extra rewards. To Saul's surprise, Julie's expression grew serious after hearing his account. "You've seen the same kind of wraith too." The two compared notes and discovered the wraiths they had encountered were indeed identical. They were all completely blackened, shriveled, and small, as if burned alive in fire. But outwardly, they looked like normal people. Only when attacked would their skin crack open, revealing the black powder within. What worried Saul even more was that the wraiths Julie and he had discovered were located in completely different parts of the city. That meant the pollution source wasn't fixed in one place, making it much harder to eliminate. Both of them believed a dangerous pollution source had appeared, but when they went to Dean Pond, he seemed preoccupied and simply told them to report everything to Kent for handling. Julie smiled sweetly and agreed on the surface, but once they left the academy, she warned Saul quietly, "If we hand this to Kent, it'll probably go nowhere." Saul's eyes flickered as he feigned ignorance. "You think Kent's suspicious?" Julie twirled a strand of her white hair between her fingers as if speaking casually. "Who knows? He's been collecting wraiths too lately. When we go on joint missions, he's always the one who ends up with them, and he never turns them in at the academy." What Kent was doing sounded a lot like Saul's own activities. Julie probably suspected that Kent wanted to stockpile wraiths, so he wouldn't deal with a pollution source that could mass-produce them. If they told Kent, he might even try to exploit it. After reporting the matter to the academy, Saul instructed little Algie and Penny to scout the area around their temporary home, checking for any more newly born wraiths. Little Algie found nothing, but Penny noticed a girl. "Her name is Izzy. She was the roommate of that wraith brother Saul captured last time. I think there's something off about her." Penny fluttered through the room, recounting her observations as she flew. "I kept noticing a burnt smell around her, and her shadow, it keeps acting strangely." Saul paused mid-action, while helping Anne adapt to her new soul weapon. "What do you mean, strangely?" Penny flew over, glanced at Anne, whose back now has 4 spider legs, then rose higher. "Her shadow doesn't match her body. There must be some pollution hiding in her body that hasn't fully erupted yet." Saul thought for a moment and said to Anne, "You and Agu continue adapting to the new soul weapon. I'll take Morden out for a look." Originally, Saul had intended to modify Anne after her scorpion tail needle was absorbed by the diary, but for some reason, Anne had begged him to continue using her for experimentation. She also adapted extremely well to the new soul weapon, Poison Spider, that Saul had crafted. He didn't know why, but could only guess it was because Anne was a fusion of multiple souls, and thus could easily adapt to other soul forms. And so at present, only Herman remained lying in the diary, alone. After assigning tasks to the others, Saul was just about to leave with his strongest combatant, Morden, to check on the girl named Izzy. But just as he reached the door, the communicator in the room suddenly rang. Saul picked it up, surprised to see the caller was Shea, who had never once contacted him on his own initiative. "Saul, I've found a new wraith, but it's extremely dangerous. I can't handle it alone." Saul replied, "In the past, didn't you always abandon the mission when something like that happened?" Preserving his life above all else was Shea's core belief. Shea fell silent for a few seconds after Saul's words, then said softly, "I only contacted you and Julie. If you're interested, come to my place within the hour." With that, he cut the transmission. Morden, standing nearby, remarked, "He's probably hiding something he couldn't say over the communicator." Saul nodded. If this isn't a trap, then anything that can make someone that cautious take a risk is more likely to be fatal than not. Chapter 482, Worked to Death. To be honest, Saul's original intention upon coming to Kaugus City was to keep a low profile. But now that he had gotten a taste of the benefits from collecting wraiths to assemble soul armaments, the current rate of collection felt far too slow. In truth, Saul was even tempted to head to the borderland right now. He knew that the number and quality of wraiths over there far surpassed those in Kaugus City. Just thinking about being able to experiment on such powerful wraiths made Saul so excited he couldn't sit still. As for the danger involved, Saul felt that, with the diary on him, even if he wanted to find a safe place to lie low, he wouldn't be able to. So he might as well take the initiative. 30 minutes later, Saul appeared in front of Shea's villa. Before he could even knock, Shea pulled him in like a thief. Inside, Julie was already waiting in the living room in a light and breezy outfit. But Shea hadn't offered any tea, not even a place to sit. Julie didn't know how long she'd been waiting. Arms crossed, she stood there fuming. Seeing Saul, Julie turned around and said, "Good thing you didn't show up at the last minute. Otherwise, I don't know how much longer I'd have to stand here. Shea hasn't said a single thing before you arrived." Shea peeked through the window near the front door, checked both sides, then pulled the curtains shut and, keeping his distance from the two, said, "This is a sensitive matter. Every time I repeat it increases the risk of alerting that person, so of course I had to wait until everyone arrived before speaking." "Well, can you talk now?" Julie snapped, clearly annoyed. "Nope. Actually, I also secretly contacted Jonah. Just don't know if he'll show up." "I thought you said you only notified me and Julie," Saul chuckled. "Sorry, that was just caution on my part. Before you two agreed to come, I naturally couldn't reveal who else was involved." Shea said the words of apology, but his face showed not even a hint of remorse. So Saul had no choice but to wait another half hour with Julie. But this time, Julie wasn't quite as bored. She had no interest in Shea's paranoia, but she was much warmer toward Saul, who seemed cold on the surface yet remained polite. Only this Saul sometimes acted like a clueless little boy, ignoring her enthusiastic advances more than once. So over the next 30 minutes, Julie began chatting with Saul, trying to build some rapport. Saul didn't dodge her like last time. Back then, he had no clear goals in Caugust, but now he was very interested in the recurring charred wraiths. While casually handling Julie's subtle flirting, he pried more information about wraiths from her. Half an hour later, Shea finally left the front door. "Let's go." Jonah hadn't shown up, even at the last minute, and Shea's face didn't look too pleased. "Oh, this is the first time you've let us into a room other than the living room." Julie shot Shea a glance, teasing. "No." Shea still kept a 3-meter distance from the two of them, answering stiffly. Under his lead, Saul and Julie went down into the basement. After passing through several tightly sealed doors, they finally arrived at Shea's intended location. "What is this?" Julie's mouth fell open in shock. "A teleportation formation." Saul was equally surprised. He hadn't expected to see a teleportation formation in the home of a first-rank wizard. All space-related magic was far from simple. For example, the spatial compression technology in the dimensional pouch Saul had bought was considered a closely guarded secret of Baton Academy, though some other places also had wizards capable of mastering such techniques. No one widely disseminated them. Aside from the usual secretive and old-fashioned reasons, the more important factor was that arcane knowledge could pose unimaginable danger to those incapable of controlling it. Like handing a blade to a child, he'd likely be the first to cut himself. That's why, upon learning that Baton had space compression-type magical items, Saul spared no cost to buy one. Because who knew how long he'd have to wait before encountering another space-related item that could be exchanged for. And the spatial leap technology used in teleportation formations was a level harder than spatial compression. Even many second-rank wizards didn't necessarily have such a formation. Take Saul's mentor Gorsa, for example. He didn't have one. But then again, it was more likely Gorsa simply didn't need it. He was the type of wizard who could teleport but preferred staying at home, your typical reclusive type. Upon seeing the spatial teleportation formation, both Saul and Julie instinctively began memorizing the runes. but halfway through, they realized the formation had a layer of obfuscating runes. The part they were seeing wasn't the actual formation. "Well, nothing in this world comes free," Saul muttered, withdrawing his gaze, already thinking about how he might get his hands on a teleportation formation. "Shea, when did you install a teleportation formation in your house? Don't tell me all your magic crystals go into funding this." Julie, being more familiar with Shea, spoke more bluntly. "HMPH," Shea sneered. "This world is dangerous, enemies are everywhere. Of course I need to prepare an escape route, and don't even think about this teleportation formation. After I send you back, I'll move it elsewhere." Julie rolled her eyes, not at all surprised Shea would say that. Saul said nothing, merely swept his eyes over the formation one last time before stepping in with the other two. Once the three were in position, Shea began murmuring an incantation. The magic crystals around the formation began to glow, their radiance quickly blinding everything around them. Saul felt a sudden dizziness, like his head and feet had flipped positions, only to flip back again. This teleportation formation probably sends over a much longer distance than my mentor's spatial blink. At the very least, Gorsa's instantaneous teleportation never left Saul this disoriented. Saul couldn't see the outside world, and a natural tension rose in his heart. He instinctively wanted to use his new meditation method to observe his surroundings, but Penny stopped him. "Brother Saul, don't look around during spatial teleportation. You might accidentally lock eyes with something from the spatial rift." Saul immediately stopped observing. "I don't know much about spatial magic. Are you saying there are spatial rifts around us during teleportation?" "Yep. A teleportation formation basically finds a safe spatial rift and uses it to transmit both physical matter and soul body. But if anything goes wrong in transit, the matter and soul might not make it to the destination." After what might have been several seconds, or perhaps several minutes, the white light finally faded. Saul and Julie looked around and found themselves in a cave. It was damp and the air smelled salty. They seemed to be near the ocean. Saul sent Penny out to scout the area while he spoke with Shea. "You specifically used a teleportation formation to take us far from the academy. Is it because what you discovered is related to someone in the academy?" While deactivating the formation, Shea answered Saul, "Yes. You know me, I'm terrified of dying, so I pay close attention to any potential conspiracies against me." Julie rolled her eyes. If Shea hadn't burned through all those magic crystals to use a teleportation formation, she really wouldn't have the patience to listen to this guy's paranoia. But Saul played along. "So, what conspiracy did you find?" Though it was just the three of them, Shea still lowered his voice. "I discovered a batch of similar wraiths. They look normal on the outside, but their insides are completely charred corpses. Before they erupt, they can maintain the appearance of a normal person for over a day." In the darkness, Shea's eyes burned with intensity. "And after tracking them down, I found that all these wraiths had one thing in common before they died." "Stop dragging it out." Julie knew Shea was about to get to the point and urged him on. Shea ignored her, waiting a few more seconds until the atmosphere grew heavy, then continued. "Someone is secretly contacting those who want to leave the city, claiming they can help them get the necessary documentation. But the people who go with them all end up as wraiths, returning to their original jobs. They keep working until their bodies can no longer hold up, and just before their human shell completely tears apart, they go and infect the next person." At that, Julie seemed to realize something and raised a hand to cover her mouth. Saul muttered under his breath, "Now that's what I call work to death." Chapter 483, Contract Ferry. According to Shea's account, Saul believed that someone was deliberately preventing ordinary people from leaving the city. But the way they were doing it was far too overbearing. If you try to leave, you die. At first, Saul couldn't understand why someone would go to such lengths. Stopping ordinary people from leaving wasn't difficult. No matter how many of them there were, they couldn't possibly resist a wizard. As long as Kaugus City or Baton Academy asserted their authority, they could easily prevent the civilians from leaving. But the persons secretly creating wraiths hadn't relied on the power of wizards. Instead, they used the most covert and most ruthless method. That meant their true purpose likely went beyond just keeping people from leaving. Someone is stopping civilians from leaving the city, Shea concluded. Right now, it's only targeting ordinary people, but I suspect they may eventually try to stop even the wizards from leaving. Just to be safe, we need to come up with a countermeasure in advance. Saul and Julie exchanged a glance. They had considered this point too, but didn't expect Shea to already be thinking as far ahead as wizards being targeted. That's a bit far-fetched, isn't it? Julie wasn't quite convinced. Ordinary people have no means of resisting wraiths, but we're true wizards. Who could possibly trap us with such a method? Saul didn't immediately dismiss Shea's theory. Instead, he asked, "Who do you think is stopping the civilians from leaving?" Shea's expression grew serious as he looked at Saul, his face grave. "No idea." Julie's upper body twitched. "If you don't know, why the serious face?" But Shea didn't feel there was anything wrong with his response. He turned to Julie. "Precisely because I don't know, that's what makes it terrifying." Julie fell silent, her expression thoughtful. Saul asked, "Even if you say you don't know, you must have a few suspects in mind, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have just come to us." The muscles on Shea's shoulders tightened, visibly tense. "I'm going to be suspicious of every possible enemy, no exceptions." "Then why not be suspicious of us?" Julie bit her lip and asked. She hadn't interacted much with Shea in the past. She could understand why Shea invited Saul and Jonah, but she couldn't figure out why she was included. So part of her wondered, could it be that Shea liked her? Jonah never goes out to hunt wraiths. He only focuses on experiments. He doesn't understand what's going on with the wraiths right now. As for Saul, everyone knows he just left the wizard tower and came to Kaugus. There's no way he has any connection to the forces here. And you? Shea looked at Julie, his gaze a bit complex. "You specialize in light elements, and you're weak. Controlling wraiths would be too difficult for you." The moment Shea said that, Saul immediately felt a wave of heat rising off Julie beside him. Saul coughed twice, not wanting to waste time listening to them argue. "So Shea, I assume the reason you called us here is to find a way to secretly eliminate the source of the pollution. Do you have any leads?" Shea answered directly, "I have someone who's probably already been targeted by the pollution source. I'll place a marker on them to track down the source's location. Then, we'll work together to eliminate it. At the very least, we need to confirm whether they're going to turn their attention toward us wizards." Saul folded his hands, his index finger tapping lightly against the back of the other. Conveniently, he had just found a similar clue. Julie, however, didn't think much of such a crude plan. "You just said there are lots of possible suspects behind this pollution source. What if it turns out to be someone we can't afford to cross? Then we run, before they turn their eyes toward the true wizards," Shea said firmly. It was clear that's exactly how he was thinking. When making a plan, step 1, plan the escape. No wonder someone like him had managed to survive this long. Julie, still irritated after being called weak, snapped back. "What if you're discovered while investigating and it's too late to run?" "That's exactly what I'm worried about. That's why I waited until I had 3 people before bringing up this plan." Shea's eyes swept over the 3 of them. "That way, when it's time to run, I'll have others to help split the enemy's pursuit." Julie rolled her eyes hard. "What if I refuse to be part of your plan?" "Then I'll kill you right here." Julie was chilled to the bone. She had interacted with Shea more than the others, so she knew his tone. Though it sounded flat, he likely meant what he said. If Shea really did try to kill her here, Julie wasn't confident she could escape. This guy had a foul mouth and a twisted brain, but his attack power and battlefield control were terrifying. Then what if we agree to your plan here but later change our minds and back out, or even leak the whole thing? What will you do then? Saul asked. He wasn't planning on doing that himself, but he was worried others might leak the plan. He didn't take kindly to betrayal from teammates. Shea understood what Saul meant. He pulled 2 scrolls from his sleeve. These are secret word contracts, products of contract fairies. We write the terms on them and sign our names. That way, we don't need to worry about anyone leaking the plan. Contract fairies. Saul took the scroll and opened it, examining it carefully. Shea didn't stop him. Wizards had to understand a contract's terms and vessel before signing. If Saul didn't check it carefully, Shea would actually be more suspicious that he was up to something. How did you manage this? You've got a spatial teleportation formation, and now a secret word contract from a contract fairy. After Saul was done examining it, Julie also took a look, her face full of disbelief. The fairy race was even rarer than the long-lost elves and dwarves. Information about their origins and habitat wasn't recorded in low-level wizard texts. Maybe high-rank wizards knew more, but low-rank wizards usually had only heard the name. Only companion fairies, those that needed to live alongside wizards, were somewhat more common. And contract fairies were even rarer than companion fairies. You don't need to know where it came from. Shea shot down Julie's question again. Contract fairies are also called curse fairies. Once a contract they've witnessed is broken, they'll begin relentless harassment. Perhaps worried that Saul didn't fully understand, Shea added. They may not be able to kill you, but they'll wait for a key moment in your experiment to ruin everything you've worked on for years or decades. Or, during a life-or-death situation, give you a little push and cost you your only chance to survive. And you'll never know when the punishment will end. You'll live in constant dread. Saul clicked his tongue. The consequences of breaking a contract really were a pain. Just then, Penny whispered in Saul's ear, "Brother Saul, if you can kill the curse fairy that shows up, then you don't have to worry about paying the price for breaking the contract." Saul immediately asked her in his mind, "How strong are curse fairies?" "Well, it depends. They always strike by surprise. I heard from my previous master that even a third-rank wizard was once tormented by a curse fairy. He didn't die, but during a crucial experiment his body mutated out of control. Anyway, before my master passed away, that wizard hadn't been seen in a very long time." "Got it. In short, I can't afford to offend them now." Saul admitted defeat instantly. Chapter 484, Bargaining. The price of breaking a secret word contract was terrifying. So, if one were to sign such a contract, every linguistic trap within it had to be avoided at all costs. After consulting the diary, whose opinion was, as usual, no opinion, Saul decided to join Shea's operation. Julie, seeing Saul agree to the contract, hesitated for a moment before also expressing her willingness to participate. All in all, the 3 of them didn't have strong vested interests tied to Baton Academy. Though Julie and Shea both held honorary mentor titles at Baton Academy, they weren't involved in any research projects, nor did they rely on the academy for advancement. This allowed them to devote more of their time and energy to working as cleaners. And that was precisely the real reason why Shea had only summoned them. This was something Saul only realized when he began discussing the contract terms with Shea. As for Jonah, who wasn't present today, even though he taught students at the academy, the fact that he didn't care where he conducted his experiments clearly showed that his research mostly depended on himself and magic crystals. That's why Shea had also planned to invite Jonah today. Unfortunately, for some unknown reason, Jonah hadn't shown up. The group spent some time finalizing the terms of the contract. There had to be restrictions, but not so strict that a single misstep would violate the contract. Once the terms were set, the three of them signed their names. Only then did they start earnestly planning out the details of their search for the source of pollution. After the preliminary plan was drawn up, Shea sent the two of them back to his villa. Then he watched them leave. Saul left the academy but didn't return home right away. He wandered the streets for a while before making his way back to Shea's villa. When Shea opened the door and saw Saul, he wasn't particularly surprised, just a little exasperated. "Julie just left and here you are. I knew you two were interested in that thing, but I really won't sell it." Saul smiled. "I came by now because I figured she'd just left." Shea froze for a moment and then curled his lip. "That's what I mean. Julie's too naive. Her movements were easily predicted by a newcomer like you. You could at least hear my offer. Even if you're not satisfied, I'll inspect your dream again, free of charge." "No need. I've got my own way of confirming the wraith is gone." Though Shea said this, he still stepped aside and let Saul in. They stopped in the living room. "Julie may be average in strength, but she became a true wizard 20 years before you did, so she does have some good stuff. That said, I became a true wizard 10 years before her, so I wasn't impressed by anything she offered. But Saul, you're from the Wizard Tower and your mentor is a third-rank wizard now, so I'm curious. What can you offer me in exchange?" Clearly, the Wizard Tower's reputation still invoked both caution and envy. But while Saul was extremely interested in the spatial teleportation formation, he wasn't about to lose his head over it. "Before I make an offer, I need to know, did you fully grasp the formula for constructing that spatial teleportation formation? Or are you simply using some kind of magical item to set it up directly at specific locations?" Hearing that, Shea's jaw nearly dropped in shock. "Sometimes I seriously suspect you've placed an eavesdropping spell in my place." He stepped back a few paces and looked toward the corners of the room. "Or did you leave something behind in my home?" "Of course not," Saul said as he subtly curled his finger, recalling the flying penny back into his mental realm. "Just a logical deduction." Shea wasn't fully convinced. He still looked around the room. But naturally, he found nothing. "All right, fine. It's the second one. I obtained a set of enchanted scrolls. One of them has the formation drawn on it. It allows me to deploy a spatial teleportation formation where needed." Just as he expected. The reason Saul suspected this in the first place was because, upon examining the magical formations Shea had deployed, he realized that Shea's innate talent for formations wasn't particularly impressive. Back when Saul entered the dream realm, Shea had tried to control him with a formation, but Saul had full confidence he could have broken it easily. With such limited skill, there was no way Shea had constructed a spatial teleportation formation all on his own. So Saul guessed that someone or something had helped him. But with Shea's personality, he'd never allow anyone else to know about his escape route. "All right, now that you know, what do you want to trade for the formation?" "Unless absolutely necessary, you usually operate alone, don't you?" Saul suddenly asked something seemingly unrelated. Shea blinked, then frowned impatiently. "Of course, I can't trust that my companions won't betray me. But acting alone has its inconveniences. There are risky but simple tasks you might give up on entirely, missing out on potential returns." Shea said indifferently, "Compared to my life, a little profit means nothing. But what if there were a way for you to fully control someone, to command them, control their life and death, and never worry about betrayal? They could even shield you from danger." A glimmer lit up in Shea's eyes. "You, don't tell me you know some kind of heart control spell." "Controlling minds through magic is only something second-rank wizards can do. But I have something similar, parasite-based magic. The host fully obeys your commands, and their life and death are in your hands. Shea was clearly intrigued. He pressed a hand to his chin, deep in thought. I know you usually choose to avoid danger when it arises, but you should consider proactively probing danger instead, then decide whether to flee or deal with it. Shea, we're wizards. If we only ever think of running, the backlash of knowledge will catch up with us sooner or later, Saul said in a low, almost bewitching voice. In the world of wizards, danger always lurked in the unknown. If one stagnated, they would inevitably be dragged into peril by an unseen hand. If safety is your only concern, then you shouldn't be a wizard. This truth applied to apprentices and true wizards alike. After a few more persuasive words, Shea finally agreed to the deal. But the condition he offered was, you give me the parasitic spell, and I'll deploy a teleportation formation wherever you specify. Saul's smile vanished. If I tell you where to place the formation, how would it still serve as a hidden escape route? But I can't just give you the scroll outright. Compared to going on the offensive, I'd rather hold on to a guaranteed way to escape. Shea puffed up his chest and refused to budge. Then there's no deal, Saul said, turning to leave. Wait. Shea still called him back. After hesitating for a while, he offered a compromise. I'll let you borrow the scroll for 3 hours. You can copy it during that time. Saul asked bluntly, is there a concealment formation layered on top of it? There is, but if your talent in formations is high enough, you should be able to strip away the concealment and deduce the original formation. Saul scoffed. Easier said than done. 3 hours isn't even enough for an accurate transcription. I need it for at least 3 days. No way, Shea raised his voice, then quickly lowered it again. 1 day at most, and you can only copy it here. Don't try to bargain, just say yes or no. Saul spent 3 minutes in deep thought. If I misdraw the formation and attempt to teleport, would I die? Shea nodded. Of course. Most likely you'd be ripped apart by a spatial rift. Less likely you'd end up in some unknown place. Reaching the other end would be nearly impossible. Incredibly dangerous indeed. Saul lowered his head. All right, I agree. Let's start now. Shea's muscles twitched as he barely suppressed a smile. Then let's go to the same room as before. I'll stand inside the defensive formation and open the scroll. You can only observe from the outside. If you try to come in, I'll throw you out. HMPH, Saul snorted in dissatisfaction. But his attention was already focused on the diary in his mental realm. Hey, diary, old pal. It's been a while since I last troubled you. But as you can see, spatial teleportation formations are extremely dangerous. You wouldn't want me to be torn to pieces during a jump, would you? Chapter 485, The Bed Sheet. Before beginning the transcription, Saul handed the parasitic magic he got from Lockeye directly to Shea. Shea didn't waste time. He spread open the scroll inscribed with the space teleportation formation in front of Saul, then immediately lowered his head to examine the new magic. Saul, meanwhile, retrieved a chair and writing materials from his storage device and began transcribing with rapid calculations. He wasn't just copying. He also wanted to use this opportunity to fully analyze the structure of the original space teleportation formation. Across from him, Shea also focused intently on the parasitic magic Saul had given him. As for how well Saul would manage to transcribe the formation, Shea didn't care. He didn't believe Saul could decipher the structure of a space teleportation formation anyway. In fact, he even doubted that Saul could manage to copy the entire formation. But since their exchange was already complete, whether Saul could transcribe it all was no longer Shea's concern. And so, Saul spent an entire day and night at Shea's villa. During this time, he sent out the nightmare butterfly to discreetly scout Shea's residence. Except for a few heavily guarded areas, Penny managed to explore nearly the entire place. This Shea was clearly terrified of death. Nearly every room was rigged with traps and concealed formations. Just maintaining the daily operation of these formations would cost a fortune in magic crystals. The next day, just as the agreed time for transcription was about to expire, Saul suddenly stood up from his chair. He carefully folded a piece of paper and stored it away, then raised a hand and incinerated the pile of discarded drafts that had built up beside him. Shea, who had been engrossed in the notes, was startled by the movement. He looked in surprise at the ashes beside Saul, then glanced at the clock above them. Confirming that there was still over an hour left before the deadline, he asked, "You're done?" Shea stood up as well. He had been sitting cross-legged on the floor the whole time. "Finished," Saul replied, packing up his table and chair once more. He glanced at the notes in Shea's hand. "I won't take up any more of your time, Wizard Shea." With that, Saul bid farewell to a still, somewhat bewildered Shea and left the villa. On the way back, he sat in the carriage, gazing at the formation he had just transcribed. Though he tried to keep his lips pressed tight, the corners of his mouth couldn't help curling upward. With the help of the diary and a full day and night of concentrated effort, he had actually managed to fully analyze the space teleportation formation on the scroll. Ordinarily, this kind of magic formation could only be deployed by second-rank wizards, but Saul's mental strength was extraordinarily powerful. He could give it a try. To construct this formation, I'll still need a few materials, might as well get them from Shea. Although Saul had given Shea the parasitic magic obtained from Lokai, if Shea wanted to conduct experiments soon, he would need to cultivate suitable parasites. Even though Baton Academy had gathered many wizards and apprentices, from what Saul had observed, no one specialized in breeding parasites, which meant Shea would likely need to spend considerable time and effort just finding the right kind of insect. Saul, however, already had ready-made parasites. Back when he absorbed Lokai's soul, Saul had asked him who else had been implanted with parasites. After confirming the list, he also collected the remaining materials Lokai had stored in the wizard tower. Among those items were uncultivated parasites. Saul could take a few and trade them with Shea for the materials needed to set up the teleportation formation. This way, apart from Shea, no one else would be able to deduce that Saul possessed the ability to construct such a formation based on the materials he was gathering. As for Shea, he had hidden the formation so carefully in the first place, so naturally, he wouldn't go around telling others that Saul had it too. Otherwise, even if they had previously agreed not to reveal that Saul possessed a space teleportation formation, people could easily guess that Saul got it from Shea. For a cautious and death-fearing wizard like Shea, leaking Saul's secret would gain him nothing and put him in unnecessary danger. Saul, overjoyed, returned to his temporary residence and immediately, as promised, sent someone to keep watch over the girl named Yitz living downstairs. That girl was already showing some strange signs. Following her might lead him to the wraith that had been turning ordinary people into charred corpses. But what Saul didn't expect was that, before anything happened to Yitz, something strange found him first. That night, utterly exhausted from transcribing the formation, Saul decided to sleep well and recover. But just as he lay down on his comfortable bed, he heard strange sounds coming from underneath. Clack, 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 clack. Rustle, 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 rustle. Saul sat up abruptly. His hand pressed on the mattress, only to realize the once firm yet soft bed had suddenly become uneven and lumpy. Looking down, he saw that the once pristine white bed sheet was now covered in countless human faces with blurred features. These faces seemed to be growing out of the mattress, barely hidden under the sheet, their features faintly visible through the fabric. Saul leapt off the bed, conjured a ball of fire in one hand and yanked off the sheet with the other. But just as he was about to hurl the fireball, he saw that the mattress beneath was clean and flat, no faces to be seen. And yet the strange noises continued, and they were coming from very close by. Saul looked down at the bedsheet in his hand, now lying limply on the floor. But its shape was odd. It looked as if someone were lying underneath it. Saul's heart skipped a beat. A black tentacle burst from his palm, lashing tightly around the bedsheet. But after ripping it apart, there was nothing beneath, only empty air. Rustle, 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 rustle. The strange rubbing noise now came again, from under the bed. Saul frowned and stepped forward. But just as he moved, he suddenly felt like he'd fallen into a deep, shadowy pond. His lungs screamed from lack of air, as if he hadn't breathed in ages. In the icy cold water, something was brushing against his limbs, keeping him from spreading his arms to swim. Above his head was a faint white glow. The water's surface didn't seem far. Saul kicked desperately, trying to float upward. Something had wrapped around his legs, pulling him back, not letting him go. Saul wanted to look down, but his suffocating need for air forced him to focus on breaking the surface first. His arms and legs were bound. He could only stretch his neck upward, trying to take a breath. Finally, his head broke the water's surface. Just as Saul opened his mouth to gasp for air, the suffocating sensation abruptly vanished, but something was covering his face. It was a white bedsheet. At the same time, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed hundreds, maybe thousands, of people crowded around him. They were all just like him, necks craned, mouths wide open, struggling to breathe, but with sheets covering their noses and mouths. Then, through the fabric, Saul saw a flicker of red swaying gently from one side. Suddenly, he realized what it was, and his heart froze in terror. "Penny," Saul shouted in his mind. "Saul, big brother." Penny's reply echoed faintly in his ears like a voice drifting from a mountain valley. In the next second, the red glow beneath the sheet began moving toward him. The air grew hot and dry, and the bedsheet began to yellow and warp from the heat. "That's not right," I did. Saul, pinned by the bodies around him, couldn't move his arms. His eyes strained to the corners, locking onto that red glow. "Penny!" At his second shout, Saul's body suddenly vanished from beneath the scorched bedsheet. When he next opened his eyes, he found himself curled up in a tight space. All around him was white, and the floor beneath was one he recognized. He raised his head slightly, hearing the fabric around him rustle strangely. Then Saul saw the white cloth above him gathering in one place, forming a heap. Its folds looked just like someone's hand gripping from the outside. Chapter 486, The Inverted City. Saul finally understood where he was being held. Earlier, when he tore off the bedsheet only to find nothing on the bed, he had suspected there was someone hidden in the pile of sheets on the floor. But he hadn't expected that the one hidden there was himself. Which meant Saul could now see a black shadow coiled around him through the white bedsheet, about to tighten. "Penny," Saul called out again. "Brother Saul." Penny's voice still sounded as distant as if it were coming from the edge of the heavens. But the moment Saul heard her, the grotesque black tendrils tore through the sheet, then vanished into nothingness. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself still lying on the bed. Beneath him were a flat bedsheet and a mattress of moderate firmness. He jumped off the bed at once, but the entire bed remained completely still. Saul could still recall the moment of his heart racing just now. "Was I dreaming just now?" he asked, clutching his chest. At first, I still remembered I was a wizard, but once I was pulled beneath the sheet, I seemed to forget all of that. Whether I was struggling underwater, smothered by the sheet, or curled up inside it, I never thought of using magic to get out of the situation. Besides calling for Penny, I forgot every means of protecting myself." Saul's face darkened slightly. He didn't know if this dream had any deeper meaning, or if someone had tampered with his mind. Then he suddenly noticed that the surroundings were unnaturally quiet. He looked up and saw that the room was empty, only he was there. And on top of that, he felt a faint discomfort but couldn't pinpoint exactly what was wrong. Something off. This is still a dream. Saul immediately activated his mental power, attempting to wake himself up. But he quickly realized that, while both his mental and magical energies flowed freely, he still couldn't wake from the dream. He tried several more times but remained in the same place. Looks like this dream isn't simple. Was I attacked by someone? The diary in his mind was still present. Saul let out a breath of relief. Even if someone had invaded his dream, there was no way they could fabricate a diary like that. He opened the diary before him, flipping to the only page still occupied, Herman. "Master, did something happen?" Through the diary, Herman could see the outside world, but he instantly noticed something was wrong. Master, why you? What did you see?" Saul knew Herman must have noticed something strange and pressed him urgently. "Master, why you're upside down." Hiss, Saul drew in a sharp breath, goosebumps erupting all over his body. At that very moment, with Herman's reminder, Saul finally realized what had been bothering him all along. He was upside down. No, wait. Saul looked around. It wasn't just him. His house was upside down as well. Everything had looked normal at first, which is why he hadn't noticed that his own orientation was inverted. He took a few steps and immediately felt that gravity was off. Even the sensation of his clothes rubbing against his body felt wrong. It was as though something was actively helping him maintain an upside-down position. "Penny," Saul called again, suspecting that Penny's voice had sounded so far away earlier because she hadn't entered this strange dream. "Brother Saul," Penny's voice was still distant but this time a bit clearer. He had apparently broken through some kind of barrier just now. There was no one else in the room. Saul grew increasingly curious as to why his room had become inverted. He slowly approached the window and looked outside. Below the building was pitch black. When Saul looked down into the darkness, he seemed to see something silently growing and slithering within it. He leaned halfway out the window, holding the frame with one hand, and cautiously looked up. Above his head, where the sky should have been, now lay a land ablaze with pale flames. The gravity on that land seemed to function normally. The flames surged upward. The ground was cracked and barren, with not a single blade of grass. Only pale fire burned fiercely, fed by unknown fuel. At the boundary where the white flames met the earth, Saul occasionally spotted charred remnants. Those were likely scorched remains, no longer recognizable. As I thought, my instincts were right. I am upside down, or rather, I'm being suspended upside down. Realizing this, Saul used a flight spell to lift himself off the ground, then steadied himself against the window frame as he floated out of the building. Once outside the room, he could see the world more clearly. The entire city was inverted. From the base of every visible building, Saul could faintly see plant tendrils and vines wrapped tightly around them. The streets had vanished. Every building had been suspended, or rather bound, and hung upside down in the air by the thick vines. Narrowing his eyes, Saul looked down at his own feet, and sure enough, he saw tiny curled green buds sprouting along the surface of his shoes. Compared to the massive, coarse branches wrapped around the buildings, the vines on his shoes were delicate and fresh, pale green with hints of new life. Saul freed a hand. A lesser flame orb appeared in his palm and in the blink of an eye, shot downward toward his feet. As the flame brushed past his soles, the tender buds withered instantly, twisting, blackening, and crumbling to ash. With the vines beneath his feet scorched and destroyed, the eerie pulling sensation vanished at once, and gravity reasserted itself. The sudden shift in gravity caused Saul, still mid-flight, to plummet toward the ground. Had he not been gripping the window frame, he might have experienced a full-on free fall. At that moment, he felt something crash into him. His vision blurred, and the inverted city, the burning land overhead, and the giant plants all vanished. When he opened his eyes again, he saw several faces staring at him. A silver butterfly, metallic and gleaming, struggled to crawl out from between those faces. "Thank goodness, Brother Saul, you're finally awake." Penny was just about to land on Saul's face when someone else got there first. "Master Ooh, are you all right?" Anne's pale, corpse-like face lunged toward Saul's chest. Outside the diary, the consciousnesses still used the corpse bodies from the wizard tower as vessels. Since those bodies were dead, they lacked the fine motor control of the living. Especially in their faces, normally they had almost no expressions. But this time, Anne's face was teary-eyed, and despite her unnatural complexion, she looked just like an ordinary girl. Saul supported Anne by the shoulder and sat up, discovering he was still on the bed. His mental power swept the surroundings. The details of the room were clear, and the auras from the other consciousnesses were steady. This time, he was finally out of the dream. With the nightmare butterfly present, someone had still managed to tamper with his dreams. If someone had truly manipulated his dream this time, then the person behind it was no simple figure. Saul's expression grew serious. He stood up and carefully inspected himself, no wounds. Then he looked up at the three figures in the room. "From your perspective, what just happened?" It was Agu who responded. Though he hadn't been the strongest in life, his deep knowledge and stable soul made him the de facto leader of the four. "Master, right after you fell asleep, your magical fluctuations suddenly dropped to nearly imperceptible levels. The nightmare butterfly immediately realized you might have been attacked in your dream, but when it tried to enter your dream, it couldn't get in." The silver butterfly landed on Saul's hair and added to Agu's explanation. "To be precise, I couldn't find you in your dream, but thanks to the great diary, there was still a faint link between us, so I could still hear your voice calling me over and over. I kept trying to pull you out of the dream, and just now, I finally succeeded." But upon hearing this, Saul shook his head. "Based on my experience, I think I was kicked out of the dream." Chapter 487, Simultaneous Warnings. You were kicked out instead of being pulled out." The little butterfly fluttered its wings. "No wonder I got flung so far just now." Saul rubbed his chin and roughly described the dream he just had. "It seemed like my dream was split into two layers. One layer had hostile attacks, and the other was just me alone in an upside-down city. After I burned the branches wrapped around my feet, some force kicked me out of the second dream. So, the first dream was aggressive, but the second one hard to say. Judging by how it kicked you out the moment you detected something wrong, the second one might actually be relatively peaceful." Agu added his own analysis. "Woo," Anne was acting a bit out of character. She simply clung to Saul's arm and cried. "We still can't be sure whether that strange dream was caused by pollution or if someone was attacking me." Saul tried to pull his arm out from Anne's grasp, but failed. He had no choice but to pause the analysis and turn his head to look at her. Because she was using a dead body, Anne's crying didn't produce tears, but her expression showed genuine sorrow. "Anne, why are you so emotional?" Saul sent his mental form into Anne's consciousness to check if she had been contaminated as well. But no, Anne's mental realm was still clean. It was just that her emotions were unstable. "I just feel like I failed to protect you." Now both Agu and Morden noticed that something was off with Anne. Unlike the other consciousness projections, Anne was a patchwork of soul fragments who had developed a new self. Because of this, her condition wasn't as stable as the others, and the chance of an accident was higher. Even though an initial check didn't show anything wrong, Saul still decided to have her return to the diary. Regardless of whether her soul was contaminated or not, as long as she returned to the diary, everything could be reset to factory settings. Anne pouted, clearly reluctant. "Master, you've just encountered danger. I should stay out here to protect you. Who knows if that dream was a warning?" Saul believed that having her return to the diary and summoning her again later, while a bit troublesome and draining in terms of magic and mental power, was the safer choice. It would protect Anne and allow him to further examine her for any anomalies. But Anne wasn't willing to go. At that moment, Agu spoke up. "Then let her stay out here. If she returns to the diary, we'd have to remove the spider legs and reattach them later, tedious and time-consuming." Saul looked at Agu and, seeing the latter's firm gaze, finally agreed to the suggestion. Just then, a black vine-like tentacle slithered in through the door, approached Saul, opened its mouth and grabbed a pen and wrote a single character on paper. "Is." There's a reaction from Izzy. This was part of Saul's arrangement with little Algie, to have her send out a clone to follow Izzy. If there was any further sign of a wraith near Izzy, little Algie was to return immediately and report. Though Saul and Shea had agreed to follow up on his lead, Saul also wanted to act on his own simultaneously, so as to avoid relying too much on a potentially one-sided conclusion. "I just had a strange dream and now something happened on Izzy's end. Are the two connected?" Saul pondered. "If someone attacked me in the dream, then who was the attacker? I had just returned from Shea's place when the attack happened. Could it be that our agreement was leaked? If their recent plan to secretly investigate the charred Wraith and Kent had already been exposed, then Saul would have to reconsider whether to proceed with their current actions." While the others continued to discuss what Saul had seen in the dream, the communication device in the corner of the room suddenly buzzed. Saul picked it up, and Shea's voice came through. "My lead moved. Get to the clinic on 5th Avenue as soon as you can." Saul tightened his grip on the communicator and made a quick decision. "I'm in the middle of a crucial experiment. I'll need some time before I can head over." You're not thinking of backing out, are you? Or you could come here and watch me run the experiment," Saul replied, deliberately annoyed. "No need for that. Fine, how long will it take you? If you can't make it in time, white hair and I will go first." Saul knew Shea didn't want to mention Julie's name over the communicator, but seriously, calling her white hair, who wouldn't know who he meant? "Half an hour." The voice on the other end let out a breath of relief. "Half an hour should be fine. We'll head there first. If the location changes, we'll leave a mark at the clinic door." Shea ended the transmission. Saul turned back to the others in the room. "Agu, keep working on assembling the second soul armament. Morden, you're coming with me to check on Izzy." Finally, he looked to Anne. "Anne, stay here and assist Agu. Stay alert for anything suspicious." Little Algie and Penny naturally went with Saul. Especially Penny, she flew straight into the diary. Saul's dream made her lose confidence. She wanted to stay inside Saul's mental realm to avoid being lost again. Everyone split up. Saul and Morden also parted ways halfway, planning to observe any wraiths near Izzy from different angles. Izzy, the one under Saul's watch, was still unaware of what was happening to her. Her roommate had recently disappeared, and though the city guards had come to inspect the room and took away all of her roommate's belongings, that was all. Izzy, as the roommate of the missing person and the last one to see her, had only been questioned for half an hour before being let go. After that, Izzy's life seemed to return to normal. The city guards never came back. Even the landlord had already put up the listing for the vacant room again. No one around her was talking about the missing girl. People seemed to forget about the neighbor overnight. Everything was moving along in an orderly fashion, but to Izzy, who was at the center of it all, it was terrifying. How can everyone be so calm, even cold? It reminded her of some rumors she had heard before coming to Caugust. Some people said that if you got too close to wizards, you'd easily encounter dangerous and eerie things. Ordinary people should live in ordinary towns or villages. Don't think that being near a wizard means you can become one. You'll only attract the attention of demons. But those words mostly came from the elders in her village. The young people, on the other hand, were all eager to chase the urban life described in storybooks. Add to that the occasional tales of those who returned from Caugust boasting about how convenient city life was and how much money they made. Most people yearned to move to Caugust City. But after entering the city, Izzy realized those stories weren't false, just incomplete. Everyone conveniently left out the unpleasant parts of life. The long, monotonous workdays, the rigid and repetitive schedules, it all made her feel suffocated. And now, with her roommate's disappearance, Izzy, for the first time, firmly decided she wanted to return to her hometown. That very morning, Izzy used her once-a-month leave to go to City Hall and apply for resignation and return to hometown clearance. She hadn't expected that resigning would be easy. It only took 3 days to process, but the application to leave the city would take 3 months. The clerk's explanation was, to investigate Izzy's records in the city. If she has debts or other unresolved obligations, her information can't be sealed and she can't leave the city. In other words, they wanted to make sure she wasn't running away after causing trouble for Caugust City. Chapter 488, Charred. Having received the result, Izzy dejectedly withdrew her resignation. She had to continue working for another 3 months just to maintain her life in the city for the time being. I'll have to wait until the approval comes through before I can resign again. Izzy returned to her rented apartment, stepped into the bedroom, and locked the door behind her. Ever since her roommate disappeared, Izzy would always lock her bedroom door every time she got home. She tossed the application receipt and other documents carelessly onto the bedside cabinet, then collapsed onto the narrow 1.2-meter wide single bed. But no sooner had she lain down than she sat up again. So hot. Why do I keep feeling so irritable lately? Izzy sat up, tugging at the collar of her shirt. It was already late September, and the weather had shifted from the recent heat to a pleasant coolness, yet she felt more sensitive to heat than ever. It was as if a fire was constantly burning inside her body, making her restless and agitated. Just as Izzy was debating whether to head to the public bathhouse to cool off, she suddenly heard an odd noise from the room next door. It sounded like someone dragging their feet across the floor, the soles scraping out a long, shrill friction sound against the surface. Izzy's hand, still fidgeting with her collar, froze in midair. She didn't dare move her body. Only her eyes shifted toward the wall adjacent to the neighboring room. What's going on? Why is there a sudden noise next door? The interior walls here were rather thin. In the past, even a slightly louder sound could be heard by her roommate. But this was the first time Izzy had ever heard what sounded like actual footsteps from next door. Could it be that a new tenant has moved in, and the landlady hasn't told me yet? With this thought, Izzy's tense body gradually relaxed. Seriously, shouldn't she at least inform me if someone else is moving in? Izzy continued tugging at her collar, trying to alleviate the heat welling up from within. Though annoyed and somewhat displeased, she still stood up, intending to go meet her new neighbor, even if they might only be living together for the next 3 months. However, just as Izzy stood up, the communicator in the corner of the room rang. The communicator was usually kept in the living room, but since Izzy lived alone now, she had moved it to her bedroom for convenience. As the communicator's pleasant chime rang out, the footsteps from next door suddenly stopped. Izzy didn't notice that detail. She picked up the communicator. Hello, Izzy, the room next to yours was rented out today. It was the landlady. Though she was called that, she was really just in charge of renting the place out. The real owner was unknown. I know. Huh, you know. Well, he should be moving in tonight, but he doesn't have the key. Since you're home, could you open the door for him? The footsteps next door resumed. Izzy's hand trembled slightly as she held the communicator. You mean he hasn't moved in yet? Of course not. If someone else had already moved in, I'd have let you know beforehand. Izzy didn't respond. Hello, hello. The landlady's puzzled voice came through, and after receiving no answer several times, she muttered to herself and hung up. Izzy remained frozen, still gripping the communicator. If the person next door wasn't a new tenant, then who was it? Her ears perked up like a rabbit, straining to catch every sound from the adjacent room. Those dragging footsteps, as if the person couldn't lift their feet. The sound came from behind the wall beside her and slowly moved toward the front door. Then, creak. The door was well maintained and usually made no sound when opened. Normally, Izzy wouldn't hear it, but today, for some reason, she heard it loud and clear. Then she heard footsteps approaching her bedroom door. Under Izzy's petrified gaze, the door handle began to turn. Just like the day her roommate disappeared. Exactly the same. Izzy didn't dare move. She feared that even the slightest noise might trigger something more terrifying. My door is locked. They can't open it. If they can't open it, they'll leave, right? But this time, instead of just rattling a few times like before, the handle began to turn faster and faster, more and more violently. Several of the screws holding it in place visibly started to shake, and the handle spun even faster. The lock clattered against the frame in a high-pitched rhythm, each impact striking like a blow to Izzy's heart. Suddenly, the sound stopped. The handle ceased moving, now hanging loosely from the door. Did they leave? Izzy was still clutching the communicator tightly, nearly crushing the casing. But the footsteps she desperately wished to hear moving away never came. Is that person still standing outside the door? Just then, the communicator in Izzy's hand rang again. Startled, she nearly dropped it. In her panic, she meant to hang up but accidentally pressed the accept button. The landlady's voice came through once more. Izzy, your new roommate just arrived. He couldn't open the door, so I told him to knock. Could you please open it for him? As the landlady spoke, a knock thump 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 rang out. Izzy slammed the communicator off. But the door being knocked on was clearly her bedroom door. And a few seconds later, the same knocking echoed from the communicator's speaker, a delay caused by the transmission lag. This must be a dream, right? Izzy was so terrified she felt numb. If it's a dream, please let me wake up already. The knocking only came once, then stopped. It was as if the person outside was politely waiting for the girl to open the door. Yes, I locked the door. They can't get in. Izzy's throat felt parched, like it was burning. She desperately wanted a sip of water but still didn't dare move. As she couldn't help but turn to look for the water glass on the desk, something caught her eye, a shadow in her peripheral vision, slowly approaching the left side of her face. The person outside had come in. Change. Izzy couldn't hold back anymore. Her shriek pierced through the room, nearly shattering the walls and windows. Change. Just as Saul was about to inspect the wraith in his hand, the scream from the other side of the door made him jump. What the? Is there another wraith inside? Without hesitation, Saul reached out, twisted the doorknob, snapping the lock clean off and pushed the door open. Inside the room, Izzy was collapsing backward in a faint, while little Algie was wrapped around her waist, keeping her from hitting the ground. As Saul stepped inside, little Algie looked up at him, eyes full of helplessness. "It's not your fault. She was just too nervous." Saul recalled what had happened just moments earlier and comforted the aggrieved creature. When he had arrived outside Izzy's rental unit, Saul had used Silent Gate to unlock the front door. The first thing he saw was a dark figure kneeling in front of one of the bedroom doors. On closer inspection, the figure wasn't kneeling. It was a charred corpse. Its legs had completely melted away, and it could only drag itself forward using its knees. It had no arms either, and was pressing its uneven, blackened skull against the bedroom doorknob. It was a newly born wraith. Without saying a word, Saul had flung a tentacle from his palm, splitting the creature in two on the spot. Then he took out a round-bottomed flask used to contain wraiths and sealed away the now immobile spirit. Just as he finished, the scream from inside startled him so badly he almost dropped the flask. After calming little Algie, Saul walked over to move the unconscious girl onto the bed. But when he grabbed her wrist to lift her up, the resistance in his hand suddenly vanished. His arm recoiled abruptly from the effort. Looking down, Saul opened his palm and saw he was holding a shriveled, flesh-colored glove. Opposite him, wrapped in little Algie's tendrils, the skin on the girl's left wrist had begun to peel away. And underneath the missing skin, the exposed flesh looked just like a charred corpse. Shriveled and blackened. Chapter 489, Source of the Pollution. "Damn it!" Saul tossed aside the human skin in his hand and stepped forward to check on Izzy's condition. The girl's skin had shriveled in an instant. It wasn't due to aging or dehydration, but because her body underneath the skin had lost its fullness. Her shriveled frame could no longer support the once supple skin. Crack! The charred left hand, stripped of its skin, lost its support and fell to the ground, shattering into 4 pieces. Perhaps triggered by the fall, the rest of Izzy's body began to crack open in multiple places. Beneath the wrinkled skin, what was revealed was a completely blackened tissue. A simple swipe of the hand would send a flurry of black powder cascading down. Someone like this was clearly beyond saving. And yet, despite keeping little Algie monitoring Izzy for so long, Saul hadn't detected when her insides had turned to charcoal. Even before her skin began to split, all Saul had noticed were traces of her being entangled by a wraith. There had been no sign of pollution breaching her subcutaneous tissue. Rip! Little Algie had been wrapped around Izzy's waist. That area had been covered by clothing, hiding her skin from view. But now, as Izzy's body slowly sagged downward, the section coiled by little Algie began to peel in layers. Saul could imagine that if left unchecked, her upper body skin would soon be pulled off like removing a shirt. "Put her down," Saul sighed softly. Little Algie quickly placed her on the ground. The moment her body lightly bumped against the floor, a large amount of black powder spilled from the skin's cracks, forming a human-shaped dust ring around her. "Master," at that moment Morden entered from outside. "I found remnants of wraiths in the pipeline, but there were also some strange scraping marks." As he stepped inside and saw Izzy, he was visibly shocked. "What happened?" "I subdued a wraith outside, but the girl in this room still died. I might have been wrong in my earlier assumptions. This girl and the others who turned into charred corpses didn't die from wraith contamination. On the contrary, they died first, then became wraiths." "In that case, something else caused their deaths," Morden analyzed. "Yeah, and the transition from life to death was extremely fast. When I rushed into the inner room, she still had the aura of the living. From that moment to the peeling of her skin and death, it was all within a few breaths. Moreover, the death began from within. Her outer skin remained intact and still emitted traces of vitality, which made it hard for me to determine exactly when the carbonization began." As he spoke, the fallen Izzy suddenly twitched. With the motion, her skin split further from the friction, shedding more black powder. Like she had come back to life, the girl stiffly and sluggishly pushed herself up from the ground. When she opened her eyeballs were somehow still intact, but lifeless, like two fake eyes. "Water!" A faint voice slipped from Izzy's mouth. She paid no attention to Saul and Morden before her, and instead turned to slowly walk toward the table. Saul didn't stop her. She's begun her wraith transformation, and the first thing she does is look for water. Morden nodded. It seems even though she's turned into a wraith, she still retains fragments of memories from her life. Saul raised his hand and gently rubbed the black powder between his fingers. When we subdued the wraith in this building last time, we saw it trying to open a door. Maybe it wasn't trying to get in to kill someone. Morden clapped his hands together. It was looking for water. Suddenly, Saul remembered the broker who had died months ago. The wraith that took him had also left black powder on the ground, and that wraith had dragged him away through a water pipe. Yet the broker didn't exhibit any signs of charring, just a set of insect-like legs growing from beneath his head. It's almost certain now, charred wraiths cannot create new charred wraiths, which means every single one of them came from something else, and that something exists all over the city. Saul and Morden exchanged looks, both of their expressions darkening. Because they were thinking of the same thing, something that spanned not just the entire city, but even more. The giant underground tree. Saul brushed the black powder off his hand and rubbed his temples. Kismet, that bastard, actually wanted to give me that tree as a gift. Just based on what the tree had shown so far, even if Saul could handle some of its branches or roots, he would be no match for the main body. The one thing going in my favor right now is that this kind of internal charcoal contamination doesn't seem to infect wizards, but that tree's main body does actively attack wizards, like what happened in the sewers and outskirts. It clearly prefers to act when no one is watching. This giant tree hidden beneath Kagust City was anything but harmless. And Baton Academy, having single-handedly developed Kagust into the massive wizarding city it was today, couldn't possibly be unaware of the tree's existence. Saul now even suspected that it was Baton Academy who had planted and cultivated this tree in the first place. Last time, Dean Pond and that wizard named Bate obviously hadn't told the truth. They'd taken out a tree root and asked Saul if he had collected any others. That may have been just a ploy to gauge how much Saul knew about the tree, and to recover the roots that had ended up in other people's hands. While Saul and Morden were pondering the true source of the black charcoal pollution, elsewhere in the city, Shea had already reunited with Julie. After a discreet exchange, Shea led Julie into the basement of a nearby building. "Where's your lead?" Julie asked through a silent communication spell. "I've arranged for him to wait upstairs." "Then why are you heading into the basement?" Shea turned and gave Julie a deep look. "Because the pollution comes from underground." Julie tugged at the long white hair draped over her chest. "Are you sure? How did you figure that out?" "I've been observing these charred wraiths for a long time. I noticed a certain pattern." "What pattern?" Julie leaned in curiously. Shea raised a wooden staff and pushed her away at the shoulder. "Don't get so close. You'll trigger my automatic attack reflex arc." Julie rolled her eyes and stepped back, keeping a 3-meter distance. "Is this far enough? Now talk." "I found that after these charred corpses appear, they don't create more." "You mean their contamination doesn't spread? That's a good thing." "But it also means that the source turning people into charred corpses isn't the wraiths. At least, not this type of wraith. I think it's something else, maybe even a wizard." Julie was stunned. "You're saying there's a monster or a wizard targeting civilians, and it's been going on for a long time." Julie wasn't the brightest, but as a wizard, she wasn't stupid either. After Shea's nudge, she quickly realized. For someone or something to be preying on civilians for an extended period, it must be extremely powerful. And yet Baton Academy had shown no reaction at all. Could it be they didn't notice? Highly unlikely. As the issuers of the cleanser missions, they had to possess more information than anyone else. If even Shea could track this pattern, there's no way they hadn't noticed. Julie started to grow tense. Her fingers clenched around her hair unconsciously. A few strands of white broke off and fell onto her arm. Then a thought occurred to her. At least the pollution is only targeting ordinary people so far. Before she could finish, Shea turned back and gave her a sharp look. How can you be so complacent? Today they target civilians. Tomorrow they'll target apprentices, and then us. Seeing Julie puff up indignantly and glare back, Shea couldn't be bothered to say more. Let's go. Based on the patterns I've analyzed, my lead is already marked and will be fully contaminated soon. And from previous experience, the pollution comes from underground. Chapter 490, Whose Conspiracy? To trace the source of the black, charred wraith, Shea and Julie delved deep underground. At the same time, they left behind prearranged secret markings on the surface, so Saul, who would arrive later, could follow their trail. But what they didn't expect was that this time, Saul wouldn't be able to catch up. As a residential building, it was nearly empty during the day. People were at work, children were at school, and those too young were usually sent to their guardians, workplaces for centralized care. Saul intended to observe what the girl, now a wraith, would do next, so he didn't subdue her immediately but followed her in silence. Meanwhile, Morden went into another room to investigate the cause of the first wraith's appearance. Arms folded, Saul watched as the girl tilted her head back and drank an entire pot of water from the table. Her throat didn't move while drinking, as though the liquid went straight from her mouth to her stomach without the slightest obstruction. Once the water entered her mouth, the girl's skin began to smooth out. Her shriveled body began to swell, gradually regaining a normal human shape. But her skin did not heal. The girl's left hand remained charred and was still missing a section. The cracks on her face and body only shrank slightly, becoming less noticeable, but showed no signs of true recovery. So drinking water can delay the cracking of the skin, Saul muttered, continuing to follow Izzy into the hallway. Izzy seemed to know where else she could find water. She left the apartment and headed straight toward the water room at the end of the hallway. But before they could enter the water room, Morden emerged from it with a grave expression. "Master, something's wrong here. My soil sensing magic was blocked by the walls." "What kind of force is blocking it?" Saul asked immediately. "Is it polluted?" Morden shook his head. "It doesn't seem like pollution, feels more like a sealing effect caused by magic." At those words, Saul no longer cared about Izzy, who was still walking slowly, and went straight to the outer wall. He placed his palm against the wall, and translucent tendrils from his soul-fishing spell immediately burrowed into it. Moments later, Saul retracted his hand. "Someone has sealed this entire building." He immediately turned to Morden. "We're going back to the top floor." But just as they reached the stairwell, a thick branch, wider than an average adult's waist, snaked out from behind the door. "Watch out!" Morden stepped forward instantly and raised his hand to cast a spell. The floor tiles in front of them rose up, pierced by sharp earthen spikes. The thick branch collided with the spikes, and both shattered on impact. "Is that a tree branch?" Morden sensed the powerful magic dispersing from the broken wood. He glanced nervously at Saul. But Saul shook his head. The diary had no warnings about this tree branch. Moreover, it had fresh green buds, nothing like the bizarre plant they had seen in the underground sewer. "The magical fluctuations are steady. This isn't a monster, it's a magic spell." Saul's palm began to gather a flame arrow. A branch that massive would at least be the product of a third-rank spell. Morden didn't have the magical strength for that, and his specialty, earth spells, wasn't well suited for fighting plant-type magic. But third-rank spells took time to cast, and Morden stood protectively in front of Saul without hesitation. Little Algae also leapt out, buying Saul precious time. The broken tree branch that had earlier clashed with Morden's spike rose again, preparing to strike once more. But at that moment, a voice interrupted the two sides locked in tension. Wizard Saul, the elevator doors suddenly slid open, and first-rank Wizard Kent stepped out. There's no need for us to attack on our own. The moment Saul saw Kent, he remembered Shea's suspicions about him. The flame arrow in Saul's hand shrank but did not vanish. However, the massive branch immediately bent down like a docile puppy upon Kent's arrival. 4 other wizards followed behind Kent. They spread out upon entering. One of them went straight to the water room and, without hesitation, captured the soul of Izzy into a soul bottle right as she reached the door. Morden seemed like he wanted to say something, but then he caught the subtle shake of Saul's head and held his tongue. Beyond these wizards, Saul also heard the sound of synchronized footsteps coming from the stairwell. It seemed that this tall building had already been infiltrated by numerous wizards and apprentices. "Wizard Kent, can you tell me what exactly is going on?" Saul asked. Kent had just arrived before him, his face equally serious. "Wizard Saul, have you noticed that lately we've captured many charred corpse-like wraiths?" "I have. The wraith I encountered just now was one of them. I was about to track the cause of her contamination." Kent nodded in agreement, then let out a heavy sigh. "In fact, we've already identified the source of these charred wraiths." Saul's eyes narrowed slightly. Kent continued, "It's Wizard Shea." The air froze for a split second. "Why do you say that?" "It took us a long time to investigate," Kent said. "Wizard Shea is someone who will stop at nothing." He pulled some documents from his robe and handed them to Saul. "Strictly speaking, I shouldn't disclose case information before we apprehend him, but you're Wizard Gorse's apprentice. I trust your allegiance is beyond question." Saul took the documents. The names and details of several individuals were clearly written on them. "These people are all wizards." "Yes. Shea specifically targets solitary wizards who avoid social contact. He acts paranoid in public, refusing to let others near him, as a way to conceal the abnormal fluctuations in his magical and mental energies." "But Wizard Shea is only a first-rank wizard," Saul replied with a puzzled frown, feigning some confusion. "He's good at escaping, but in a real fight." Saul trailed off, but his meaning was clear. "Exactly. He uses his supposed weakness in combat to mislead others. We reviewed the list of recently missing wizards and found that many of them had secret contact with Wizard Shea before they disappeared. He would play on their fears, exaggerate certain threats, lure them into traps he had prepared in advance, and then seize their inheritances." Saul raised a hand to his chin thoughtfully. "Wizard Shea invited me out just now too, but I happened to encounter that wraith, which delayed me." Kent's brows furrowed tightly and he gritted his teeth. "So he tried to go after you as well. I thought he'd at least hesitate out of respect for your mentor. But it makes sense. With a great mentor like yours, you must carry valuable materials. After killing so many other wizards, Shea's standards have risen. Of course he would covet what you bring." Previously, Saul had offered some rare magic materials in exchange for wraiths and magic crystals. But he had been careful not to reveal anything too precious, for fear of attracting attention in Kaugus City. "Then why have you surrounded this building?" Saul suddenly asked. "We were tracking the source of the charred wraith contamination and detected a similar aura inside this building," Kent answered with a serious tone. "You said Shea invited you out, didn't you?" "Yes. I think the reason the pollution source appeared here was because of Shea's invitation. Kent locked eyes with Saul. He was certain you wouldn't return. Chapter 491, Conspiracy. Kent's words made a flicker of unease appear on Saul's face. He lowered his hand and immediately turned toward the stairwell. If Shea was certain I wouldn't come back, then his attack must be targeting my residence. I need to go check it. Kent followed closely at Saul's side and slightly behind. I'll go with you. Morden deliberately lagged half a step behind, walking just behind Kent. The four wizards who had entered with Kent, however, did not follow them. It seemed each had their own task. Upon entering the stairwell, Saul didn't break into a run. He glanced at the thick branch occupying the left side passage and walked upward with steady steps. As he moved, the branches beside him continued to grow and sink with his pace. Is this plant from some fourth-rank spell? Is Dean Pond here too? No, the Dean wouldn't leave the academy easily. This is a spell scroll personally crafted by him, Greatwood Growth. While not as powerful as when cast by the Dean himself, it's still enough to seal off an entire building. What do you think the pollution source is? No idea. This world has everything. You won't understand what the true pollution source is until you see it. Saul fell silent. They ascended 6 floors in the stairwell, still 10 floors away from Saul's room. The spiraling staircase seemed endless, the repeating scenes above and below giving off an eerie illusion of overlapping time and space. Wizard Saul, how exactly did Wizard Shea trick you into going out to find him? Kent suddenly asked. He said, you were secretly cultivating wraiths to kill those who tried to leave the city. Kent burst into laughter, his shoulders shaking. Ha ha ha, and that's why it couldn't be me. If I wanted to raise wraiths, I wouldn't need to do it like that. Aren't the naturally born wraiths in this city enough for me to use? Saul stayed silent. Kent glanced at Morden, who had been cautiously watching him the entire time, then asked Saul again. Shea must have painted a terrifying picture to fool you, scared you into cooperating with him to investigate me, right? More or less. Saul didn't seem to be paying Kent much attention anymore. His steps gradually slowed, and even the branches beside him had started to grow past him. I'm a bit curious now, how did Shea deceive you? Did he describe something horrifying and bizarre, like people standing upside down or something? What? At that moment, Shea and Julie were sprinting through an underground waste treatment facility. Julie was in a miserable state, her once smooth skin now covered in grime and scratches. She grumbled, I knew I shouldn't have trusted you. Shea kept an eye on their surroundings as he snapped back. Oh, come on. You're not like Saul. You've lived here for 7 or 8 years. You wouldn't have agreed to come unless you noticed something too. Julie bit her lip. I didn't notice anything. After several minutes of running, the two reached a dead end. There was no way up, and the rustling sounds behind them were growing louder. Julie whipped her head, scattering white hair everywhere, finally beginning to panic. Aren't you supposed to be good at running away? Think of something. That's strange. There used to be a small exit here. Shea ignored Julie, staring dazedly at the wall in front of him. What kind of prep work did you even do? Julie complained while nervously watching their rear. I didn't expect. Kent's capabilities are overwhelming. Shea's eyes darted rapidly as if calculating their chances of escape. He suddenly turned to Julie and muttered, could it be that Saul didn't come this time because he sensed something? No way. He's only been here a few months. How could he know more than me? How much do you think Saul knows? I think, Shea began to answer, then suddenly froze, realizing the voice was Julie's at all. Julie, at that moment, was staring in horror toward the path they came from. An old man with a head of white hair and an arm-length wooden staff slowly walked out of the tunnel and stood before them. Dean Pond. Julie's eyes widened in disbelief. Shea, on the other hand, didn't seem particularly surprised. Hello, Wizard Julie. Wizard Shea doesn't look too shocked. Did you already guess that Kent was working for me? Shea licked his dry lips, taking 2 steps back until his back pressed against the wall, where their escape route had inexplicably vanished. I didn't know. At first I just thought, if Kent really wanted lots of wraiths, given his role as the organizer behind the cleaner, he wouldn't need to secretly breed them. Wraiths can't be directly absorbed, and he wouldn't need so many. Shea looked at Dean Pond with a bitter smile. Now I get it. If it's Baton Academy that needs the wraiths, then no amount would be enough. Julie was trembling so badly that even her hair seemed to shake. She had dared join Shea to secretly investigate Wizard Kent, but she didn't dare go up against a second-rank wizard like Dean Pond. She wasn't one of those crazy mentors from the Wizard Tower, delusional enough to think they could assassinate a second-rank wizard. You don't need to be so nervous. Dean Pond raised his hand. Atop his wooden staff, a white rose bloomed. You two are both honorary mentors of the Academy. I'm not a murderer. Since you've uncovered the secret, then why not become official mentors of Baton Academy? Julie immediately felt a weight lift from her chest. She secretly released a rainbow-colored aura. On Dean Pond's body, there was neither the black of murderous intent nor the gray of deception. That meant if she agreed to become an official mentor of Baton Academy, she could survive. Becoming an official mentor required signing a contract. The other mentors were tight-lipped about the contents of the contract, but clearly it wasn't lenient. Still, compared to death, temporary loss of freedom was tolerable. Julie immediately forced a stiff smile. That's wonderful, Dean. I'd be honored to join. But Shea wasn't so obedient. Dean Pond, the truth is, we only found where Kent was cultivating the wraiths. We haven't discovered anything about the Academy. Dean Pond didn't give Shea a chance to finish, become an official mentor, or try to run. Shea's pleading expression vanished instantly. I knew it. There's no way a city like Caugust could grow this powerful without a grand conspiracy behind it. Join you. You think I haven't figured it out. Those official mentors are all whatever games you're playing, count me out. As he spoke, Shea's hand remained tightly clenched at his collar. And as he finished his sentence, a flickering glow burst from his chest. Dean Pond's face darkened, and he just started to raise his staff, when Shea's entire body suddenly glowed, then began to disintegrate like he was being burned away by the light erupting from within. In the blink of an eye, he vanished. Spatial teleportation formation, Dean Pond muttered to himself. Julie was also dumbfounded. He actually hid a teleportation array on himself. Isn't he afraid of attracting monsters from the spatial rift? For a high-probability death, taking a low-probability risk is worthwhile. Sometimes, I rather admire Shea. Dean Pond looked at the spot where Shea vanished, showing no surprise or disappointment. But he forgot one thing. What? Julie hugged herself. She had a feeling the Dean was pausing on purpose, waiting for her to ask. In the face of absolute power, escape is meaningless. Dean Pond smiled with satisfaction. Chapter 492. Do I look like a pollutant source? Deep in the forest. An unremarkable rabbit hole. Suddenly the ground swelled and cracked open, followed by a stream of fresh red blood gushing out. After a low, repressed, and painful growl, a disheveled figure burst out from beneath the earth. Shea crawled out of the ground with great difficulty, his expression twisted in pain. The source of his agony wasn't spatial dizziness from teleportation. Once he fully emerged, it became clear. Everything below his knees was gone. The stumps were clean and smooth. No blade, no matter how sharp, could have made such a perfect cut. Blood sprayed in torrents from the wounds, and the moment Shea pulled himself free, he spun around and cast a moderate healing spell on himself. But although magic could stop the bleeding, it couldn't regenerate lost limbs. Without experimental healing procedures or powerful treatments, only a few third-rank wizards could perform healing spells capable of complete restoration. Still, Shea didn't panic. He had prepared this escape tunnel in advance and hidden various emergency supplies nearby. But before he could crawl even half a meter further, a long black robe suddenly appeared before his eyes. The bottom of the robe brushed the ground, making one wonder whether there were actually feet beneath it. Shea slowly raised his head and saw a face not commonly seen. Bait. A gaunt woman with sunken cheeks and black hair stood with her head lowered. I'm here to invite you to become an official mentor at the academy. That was all Bait said. Shea clenched his teeth. The teleportation on his chest could only be used once in a short period. A second use would mean being torn apart in the spatial rift. Feigning submission, he lowered his head, but inwardly he was already planning how to use his remaining magic tools to escape. Yet before he could pretend to submit and buy time, a searing heat surged through his body. It felt like he was about to combust. What the, valuing his life above all else, Shea cried out in alarm. But he had only spoken half a word when black smoke suddenly began pouring from his mouth. Like a campfire catching flame. Every plan, every preparation, every backup he had vanished from his mind. His final thought was nothing more than a desperate desire to look up one last time at that long-hidden, gaunt woman across from him. You're a thigh. The words were sealed in his throat, and then his body suddenly swelled and collapsed. In that brief expansion and contraction, his body shrank dramatically. Only the outer layer of his skin remained, sagging loosely over the husk of his form. From that point forward, Shea made no further sound. Bait calmly watched as Shea completed his metamorphosis. Then she beckoned with her finger. Rise, respond to my invitation. At Bait's command, the lifeless Shea slowly climbed to his feet. But his movements were unnatural, as if it wasn't muscles and tendons that were moving him, but his bones themselves. When the new Shea stood fully upright, his jawbone rotated downward, producing a rasping voice. I am willing to become an official mentor at Baton Academy. Bait, expressionless, reached into her robe and pulled something out. A small watering can used for tending flowers. Kneel. Shea dropped to one knee like a knight, awaiting a royal decree. Bait lifted the watering can over his head and slowly tipped it. Fine, clear water trickled from the spout, dripping directly onto the crown of Shea's head. A white, transparent filament began to grow from the center of his scalp, twisting upward, seeking more of the nourishing water. As the liquid flowed over his withered form, Shea's shriveled body gradually filled out again, restoring to a normal human appearance. His sagging skin adhered smoothly back onto him. Bait retracted the watering can. You should return and register. Shea turned stiffly and began walking toward Kaugus City. At first his steps were faltering and unsteady, but after about 100 meters, his movements became much more natural. What? An inverted wraith, Saul repeated Kent's question, puzzled. What's that? Kent had been staring at Saul's eyes the entire time, trying to read something from them, but found no sign of deception. They had paused on a landing between flights of stairs, and Kent chuckled while shaking his head. It's nothing, just that the buildings in Kaugus City are very tall, so sometimes there are inverted wraiths. Saul turned Kent's words over in his mind, then suddenly understood. You mean people who jump. He recalled hearing a chilling short story once. Saul smiled faintly. First time I've heard it called that. He resumed climbing. If that's the case, it's actually fine. I keep all my important materials on the top of the table anyway. This time it was Kent who looked confused. He had no idea what Saul meant by on the top of the table. But before he could ask, he saw Saul suddenly speed up and hurried to follow. Just as they neared the top floor, Saul's residence, a thunderous explosion almost shattered their eardrums. The ground shook violently, and the radiation alarms on each floor immediately began shrieking. "Your place blew up," Kent cried out in concern. But Saul merely gave him a puzzled glance. "No, it was the floor below mine." Kent's steps faltered. He twisted his neck to look Saul in the eye. Saul met his gaze with a faint smile. "Shall we go see what caused it?" Kent looked away. "No need. I'll have someone else check it out. Your materials are more important right now." "Fair enough," Saul said, saying no more as he picked up the pace again. If the stairwell weren't so cramped, forcing him to twist side to side while moving, he would have flown up there with a flight spell already. Half a minute later, Saul reached his residence. He unlocked the door with his access token and went straight to the central laboratory. Inside, Agu and En were locked in battle with several humanoid shapes formed from clusters of black powder. But they were clearly restraining themselves, avoiding destructive spells to protect Saul's stored materials. And hanging upside down from the center of the ceiling was a massive flower. It resembled a lily of the valley, small petals, bulbous center. Black smoke streamed steadily from its blossom. Each time the smoke touched one of the powder-formed humanoids, the shape became more solid. At this rate, unless they used extreme measures, there'd be no way to eliminate the enemies. Seeing this, Saul immediately cast his most practiced spell, Strike Undead. But the powder humanoids merely staggered under the magic's impact. It didn't seem to have any special effect. "Not wraiths," Saul muttered, switching to a lesser flame pearl. This fire element spell clearly had a greater effect than the dark element one. As Saul prepared to unleash a more powerful fire arrow, a flaming fist suddenly flew past from behind him, smashing one of the humanoid forms. "Looks like I'm better suited to dealing with these things. Leave them to me," Kent said as he charged forward. As expected of a powerful first-rank sorcerer, Kent effortlessly dispatched several humanoids that had stalled Agu and En for so long. But the heat from his spells ignited some of the room's furnishings and caused the flower overhead to wilt. Sensing danger, the flower retracted its petals and attempted to flee through a hole in the ceiling. "HMPH, trying to run now, too late," Kent shouted, flicking his wrist. A brown blur shot up the stairwell and chased after the escaping flower, vanishing through the rooftop opening. Despite his easy victory over the powder figures, Kent seemed wary of the flower. "Plants made by giant wood growth aren't great at tracking. I'll follow and make sure it doesn't get away. Saul, you check for any material losses." Just as Kent turned to leave, Saul placed a hand on his shoulder. Kent was suddenly frozen in place. He turned around, confused. "What's wrong? I need to catch up quickly." But as he turned, he realized Saul was standing very close. Before Kent could instinctively back away, countless black and gray tendrils burst from behind Saul. They spread out like gaping maws, forming a prison of twisting limbs that instantly engulfed both of them. At the same time, the black powder that had been scattered on the floor suddenly leapt into the air and shot toward Saul, only to be absorbed into the dark, grayish membrane of the tendrils. "Are you trying to kill me in the chaos?" Kent thought Saul was seizing the moment to strike, and rather than panic, became excited. Red flames surged around his body. But Saul made no aggressive move. He simply smiled and grinned wide. "Don't be nervous, Wizard Kent. I just wanted to ask, do I look like a pollutant source to you?" Chapter 493, The Performance. A surge of crimson flame ignited over Kent's entire body, radiating waves of intense heat. The tendrils behind him were instantly set alight by the flames and within mere breaths were reduced to ash. As the cage that had trapped the two of them vanished, Kent's first reaction wasn't to retreat, but to advance. The flames around him leapt forward like a ferocious tiger leaving its lair, transforming into a massive net that swept toward Saul. The fire engulfed Saul, who was just an arm's length away, yet the latter made no move to dodge. Rather than feeling triumphant, Kent's expression turned grim. He sensed something was wrong almost immediately. He retreated 3 steps in quick succession, then turned his head to look around, only to find that the others who had been in the room were now gone, and even the hole in the ceiling, pierced earlier by a massive flower, had disappeared. Something's wrong. This is all an illusion. Kent immediately forced his mental energy outward, spreading it in all directions, attempting to use his meditation techniques to break through the barrier before him. Yet Saul, who had now become a figure of living fire, stood calmly opposite Kent, as if nothing had happened. "You're quick to catch on. HMPH, so you never believed a word I said. You already teamed up with Shea. You brought me up here just to trap me." This was the first time Kent had failed to break an illusion, but he wasn't panicked. "But did you forget that I still have the Greatwood growth, given to me by the Dean?" Kent suddenly began chanting an incantation, and his voice seemed to ripple through the air, becoming visible waves that spread out. From above, he received a resonating tremor in response. "Kill Saul." At his command, the space around him began to quake. The fiery image of Saul vanished. Kent knew that, although Greatwood Growth was a 4th-rank spell, once removed from a 2nd-rank wizard's direct control, its power and responsiveness would be diminished. It might not kill Saul. But that was Kent's real goal. He merely wanted to use the attack as a distraction to escape the illusion. Once he was free, as a seasoned 1st-rank wizard, killing someone who had only recently entered the 1st rank less than a year ago, was that not child's play? In terms of spell knowledge and the number of spells mastered, he, an official mentor who had studied at Baton Academy for over a decade, far outclassed Saul. Yet despite trying various techniques, like mental synchronization and energy disruption, to break the illusion, Kent failed again and again. He's only been a 1st rank for less than a year, and yet his mental strength is formidable. Or did he set up an illusion formation here in advance? Though he couldn't break the illusion for now, Kent didn't panic. The Greatwood outside was still under his command, and illusions couldn't affect that. Saul was currently nowhere to be seen, likely tied up dealing with the tree's attacks. The Dean told me not to lay a hand on Saul, so I probably won't get the chance to use my backup plans. But this is even better. This time it was Saul who attacked me first. Fighting back is only natural. Thinking of Saul's background and the wealth he had flaunted, Kent's eyes gleamed red with excitement. That Saul was the apprentice of a wizard tower master. Rumor had it that since becoming an apprentice, he'd lived inside the tower, rarely venturing outside. With Gorsa's generous support, he had no idea how brutal competition among outside wizards could get, even for a scrap of resources. Baton Academy might control a city and nearby villages now, but it had risen from the borderland, an unclaimed land. Back when they left the borderland, the Academy had burned through countless resources. Even their original 3rd-rank wizard had died not long after breaking out. Saul had exchanged spell materials for wraiths twice. Those materials might not have seemed rare to him, but for ordinary Academy wizards, they were treasures. And the casual way he offered them up, it had stirred greed in countless onlookers. But they all hesitated, wary of the wizard tower master and Dean Pond's orders. All except a few. Kent was one of those few. As soon as he found out wraiths were appearing in Saul's building, he locked onto the location, using discovering a source of pollution as his excuse to seal the entire building with Greatwood growth. What he hadn't expected was that Saul, who looked like a young boy, was actually harboring deep intentions and had long been prepared. The moment Saul entered, He caught Kent in an illusion, leaving him no chance to activate his backup plans. By now, that tree should have tangled up Saul and his little entourage. But without someone directing it, the tree is just a lifeless object. Too bad I was so quick to use my smoke servants after getting ambushed. Otherwise, they could have launched a sneak attack by now. Kent's face was expressionless, just like the stern and rigid team captain he'd always pretended to be. But it was all just for show. He stopped trying to break the illusion with brute force and instead retrieved a sorcerous tool from his compression bag. No choice but to use this. I originally planned to save it for when I became second rank to use against that guy, but using it on Saul won't be a waste either. Once I'm out of this illusion, that little bastard, as good as dead. Time to show him the difference between a veteran first rank and a fledgling. The tool he brought out was covered in tiny gears and chains, with a crank handle at the bottom. He held the device with one hand and gripped the handle with the other. After taking a deep breath, he abruptly withdrew his mental force, then used his powerful arms to rapidly crank the handle. The gears on the device spun, so fast they turned into a blur. Just as Kent expected, the surrounding illusion began to melt away like thawing snow. A smirk curled at the corner of his lips. As I thought, dwarven devices are the bane of mental energy interference. But when the illusion cleared and the surroundings reshaped, Kent frowned. He was no longer in Saul's room. Instead, he stood atop a massive stone platform suspended in the air. All around him were stars twinkling with unnatural frequency, and above him floated a giant, dark red hardcover book. What is this place? Wait, this is still Saul's illusion, a second layer. Kent cranked the device faster, but this time nothing changed. Now he was beginning to feel uneasy. He slowly stopped cranking and cautiously extended his mental feelers. His mental power traveled freely through this space, yet yielded no feedback at all. The book overhead and the stone platform beneath his feet looked tangible, but under mental probing, they might as well have not existed. This is not something a first-rank wizard should be capable of. Kent finally felt fear. How could Gorsa dare entrust something this dangerous to a first-rank wizard? Doesn't he fear the intense radiation will mutate Saul? Kent's heart pounded wildly. He hadn't felt this nervous in a long time. At the same time, an intense and twisted jealousy began to fester and spread in his chest. Why hadn't he ended up with such a good teacher? I can't keep this up. Maybe Saul has some anti-radiation method, but I'm completely exposed here. Kent gritted his teeth. His expression finally began to contort. After casting several rounds of self-hypnosis, he pulled out a small vial. Inside was a milky white, almost milk-like fluid. Kent pulled out the wooden stopper and poured it directly over his own head. A final, translucent white thread sprouted from the top of his skull, like a newly grown grapevine, curving and twisting as it extended toward the sky. At the same time, Kent began cursing loudly, spittle flying from his lips, completely unaware of how wild he looked. Saul, you son of a percentant asterisk, Baton Academy welcomed you with open arms. The moment we found a pollution source, we rushed to protect you. And you want to murder your mentor during the chaos. You really think Baton is easy to push around? As he finished shouting, Kent quickly layered 3 defensive spells over himself, bracing for a counterattack. Deep down, though he still felt some regret, he regained a measure of confidence. His words weren't meant for Saul, but for the entity behind the tree. Yet no sooner had the words left his mouth than Saul's figure stepped out before him, as if walking through a sheet of water. So the thread above your head is from Baton Academy. Saul showed no intent to stop Kent's appeal. He merely crossed his arms and stared at the thread overhead. So everything, the pollution in Kaugus City, the wraiths, was all under your control. You've been cultivating these colonies on purpose, including that inverted tree. This time, Kent's expression completely changed. He had no idea how Saul had connected all the dots. Worse, he was right. Chapter 494. What did he see? Did Saul trust Shea? Or had he once nearly trusted Kent? Or perhaps the kind and hospitable Dean Pond? No. Saul trusted no one. They hadn't grown up together. They hadn't risked their lives to save each other, nor were there any shared interests driving them. How could Saul possibly trust a few people he'd only known for less than half a year? What's more, from the very first day he arrived in Kaugus City, he sensed that something was off. On the surface, it was densely populated, thriving, its witchcraft tools having broken free of traditional constraints to integrate into daily life, an almost modernized society. But under the dazzling curtain of prosperity, the shadows told a different story. Rigid work hours, high-pressure workloads, monotonous and repetitive tasks, and the frequent appearance of wraith incidents. This city, with its towering buildings and modern flair, felt to Saul like a machine spinning beyond capacity under immense pressure. Now and then, bolts and plates of unknown use would pop off, giving him the eerie impression that everything before his eyes might suddenly explode and collapse into ruins at any moment. Even with a multitude of wizards and apprentices constantly patching it up, Saul didn't believe this place was a safe haven. And now it seemed, those surface-level repairs had merely concealed the inner corrosion. Saul had lifted the hood of the engine, only to see an oil-leaking machine beneath. Sadly, he could no longer stay here and reap its benefits. Why did Dean Pond build this city? How many of the people here are truly human, and how many are nothing but empty skins? As Saul's cold questioning rang out, Kent gradually regained his composure. This isn't something you should know. Even if you're Gorse's student, you'd be swallowed by the swamp for asking such things. Seeing that Kent was determined not to tell the truth, Saul stopped wasting words. The moment Kent entered, his intent was clear. He was probing to see if Saul knew the truth. The so-called pollution source was most likely a trap set by Kent himself, and the massive flower bud and humanoid smoke that suddenly appeared in the room were clearly under his control. Kent had brought people, powerful spells, and the local advantage. There was no way Saul could afford to clash with him directly. So the moment Saul stepped into the room, confirmed there were no other wizards nearby, he immediately launched his most powerful spell against Kent, Mind Battlefield. Kent was caught completely off guard. Or rather, it never even occurred to him that Saul would be the one to make the first move. With no defenses in place, he was effortlessly dragged into the Mind Battlefield. Despite having considerable mental strength himself, Kent was captured before he could even muster a shred of resistance. Yet just as Saul's body was softening, transitioning from man to monster, he felt a burning pain rising from below. Looking down, Saul saw the platform under his feet glowing red-hot, as if a raging fire was roasting it from beneath. The lower half of Saul's body, now transformed into writhing tentacles, began to sizzle from the heat. Impressive. You're the first near second-rank wizard I've pulled in who can actively alter the surrounding environment. Looks like I'll have to start preparing for platform combat when dealing with second-rank wizards in the future. Saul spoke calmly. Opposite him, Kent's eyes were already bulging in shock. His third-rank spell Doom of the Earth's Core was a unique creation, modified from another spell called Burstfire, using the mechanics of volcanic eruptions. Its magical intensity and destructive power surpassed that of ordinary third-rank spells several times over. But now, the lava and flame that should have erupted instantly had only managed to heat the ground beneath Saul's feet. Unwilling to believe it, Kent pushed aside the fact that his sneak attack had been exposed and frantically chanted incantations, pouring more magic power into the spell. Yet the stone slab beneath Saul's feet merely grew redder. It still didn't unleash the devastation he sought. Not bad. Let's end it here for today. Though my main focus is on the dark element, I've also learned a few fire spells. Since you've offered them up, I'll gladly accept. Kent still had no idea what was going on. But he was beginning to suspect that where he now stood wasn't some illusion. He even wondered whether he had entered a world side. But a world side shouldn't be something that could be moved on a whim. Kent's throat twitched as he finally gave up. The backup that should have arrived instantly was still nowhere in sight. He no longer planned to keep fighting Saul. In a direct confrontation, he believed he could stand toe-to-toe with Saul and maybe even win. But who could have predicted that this place would be so twisted? A towering wall of flame erupted in front of Kent. Just a basic wall of fire. He didn't expect it to hurt Saul. But as soon as it formed, blocking the space between them, Kent turned and bolted. The platform wasn't large. After just a dozen meters, he reached the edge. Looking down, beneath his feet was nothing but starry sky. Behind him, several tentacles burst through the fire, forming a massive hand with over a dozen fingers that slammed toward Kent's position. If I stay, my spells are useless. I can only wait to die. Kent's eyes gleamed with ruthless determination. Might as well charge into this strange space and take my chances. With that thought, the flaming tentacles nearly upon him, Kent made his decision. He leapt. The moment Kent left the platform, all the flames and heat vanished in an instant. But the burns on Saul's body remained. Returning to human form, covered in severe burns, Saul walked to the platform's edge and looked down at Kent's rapidly shrinking figure in the starry void below. "Master," came a voice. Hermann had finally emerged from the diary. Saul hadn't let him out earlier. This battle was one Hermann had no place in. Unless he underwent a powerful soul-body modification, Hermann would remain outbench in the future. And if Saul ever ran out of black pages, he might just clear Hermann out to make space for someone new. The thought alone made Hermann break into a cold sweat, even though he no longer had sweat glands. "I've never experimented with having a soul-body jump off the platform before." Saul's voice was calm and steady. Each time he entered the mind battlefield, his emotions were heavily suppressed by the nightmare butterfly, allowing him to last longer in that world, which made this version of Saul the most dangerous one. Hermann edged slowly to Saul's side and stopped at the platform's edge. The platform was stable. There was no howling wind. Yet Hermann's heart pounded as if he had grown several more hearts, each thudding wildly at different rhythms and frequencies. He didn't understand. How had that wizard Kent managed to summon the courage to jump? Then Hermann looked down and found that, even after several seconds with Kent nearly out of sight, he could still see Kent's face. Especially strange. Kent had been facing away from the platform the whole time, yet now he had turned his head. And that face was twisted with terror, as if he had seen something beyond his worst nightmares. What did he see? Overwhelmed, Hermann shivered violently, nearly slipping off the platform like an idiot. After barely composing himself, he turned to look at Saul, who had just spoken. Saul had clearly seen Kent's expression too, but unlike Hermann's panic, Saul's face held only a calm curiosity. He even lifted one foot into the air. All around, the stars began blinking faster, like thousands, tens of thousands of people blinking frantically in unison. Master, I think maybe you shouldn't use yourself as the test subject." Halfway through, Hermann wanted to slap himself. Telling Saul not to use himself for experiments, was he suggesting Saul should use him instead? But what Hermann feared most didn't come to pass. Saul retracted his foot. "What are you afraid of? Didn't you notice the diary didn't react?" A few moments later, a shadowy black figure shot upward from the starry abyss below, straight into the massive hardcover book floating above Saul's head. The diary shrank to the size of a palm, then lazily floated down into Saul's hand, fluttering open with a rustle, revealing a brand new black page. Chapter 495, Eyeballs. Pie. Saul snapped the diary shut. It's still too chaotic outside. We'll interrogate Kent after we leave Caugust. With that, not waiting for Herman's eager nodding, Saul's figure vanished from the platform. When he opened his eyes again, Morden immediately rushed over. At that moment, Kent, who was standing opposite, suddenly erupted with countless eyes across his face. Erupted, not grew. It was like a cake suddenly swelling in an oven. In the blink of an eye, Kent's head tripled in size, with countless thumb-length fissures splitting open from his cheeks to his scalp. From each of those fissures, murky crystalline eyeballs emerged. These eyeballs had pupils in a variety of colors: amber gold, deep-sea blue, blazing red. At first, the colorful pupils spun around wildly, but soon they all locked onto Saul in unison. What does it look like if a head was reduced to nothing but eyeballs? Either way, Saul couldn't help but take half a step back. If he weren't worried about startling the thing, he'd have cast a protective barrier on himself immediately. Pie! A crisp explosion suddenly sounded beside Saul. Startled, Saul turned his head to find that Morden's eyes had just burst, like he had suddenly grown new ones that exploded shortly after. Saul quickly turned back to Kent. The eyeballs all still stared at him, but before he could react, those eyes shriveled and deflated, vanishing without a trace. Kent's body fell stiffly to the ground. With all the eyes gone, his head looked like a honeycomb, deeply disturbing. "What were those eyes?" Saul murmured. "Morden, you go back." Although Morden's eyes were still bleeding, his body was crafted from a corpse, a semi-active vessel, so surface injuries didn't matter much. But the sudden appearance and explosion of eyes, that symptom was identical to many people who had been contaminated. To avoid the risk of residual pollution, Saul decided to send Morden back into the diary for a thorough cleansing. Morden dropped to the ground instantly, turning into a corpse on the spot. Seemingly triggered by Kent's death, the massive tree that had been chasing after the eerie flower withered abruptly. Its magic dissipated in all directions and soon turned into specks of starlight, vanishing completely. Earlier, Kent thought he had controlled the tree's growth from within Saul's mental realm, believing it would fight Saul on his behalf. But in truth, the tree never received his command. From beginning to end, it had only been chasing enemies outside. Had Kent not mistakenly believed Saul had held out this long under the tree's assault, had he not overestimated Saul's combat strength, he might not have leapt from the platform in the first place. He could have lasted longer. Saul looked up. From the hole above, beams of sunlight streamed in, along with a few withered leaves drifting down from the opening. Then a figure followed, jumping down after them. It was Agu. When Agu entered and saw Morden and Kent's corpses lying on the ground, he jumped in fright and rushed to Saul's side. "Master, are you all right?" "I'm fine," though Saul was puzzled. Why was he fine under all those eyes while Morden had his explode? "Where did you go just now?" And I were on the rooftop, guarding against the two plants breaking in and interfering with you. The tree growth spell has collapsed. What's the situation with that flower outside?" That flower was likely one of Kent's traps too. With Kent dead, the flower was probably following in the tree's footsteps. At first, the two plants were going at it like crazy. Then, when the tree suddenly vanished, I thought the flower would turn on us. But instead, it got scared for some reason and fled down the outer wall. Agu paused for a second, then leaned in to whisper, and followed that plant into the underground. Saul lifted his eyes. "Underground?" Agu nodded. "I placed a tracking spell on it. When the consciousness bodies are close to Saul, he can sense their locations clearly. But at greater distances, or when his attention is elsewhere, that sense fades. After the underground sewer incident, I told you all not to enter the underground lightly. Yet chose to go after the enemy down there on her own. Did you notice anything unusual about her? I did. Ever since you and came back from the outskirts, she's been a bit withdrawn. Saul immediately recalled the ambush in the countryside. The root network underground had ignored him, targeting and specifically, very abnormal. It clearly hadn't been a coincidence. As Saul was thinking, another group of wizards burst into his room. Lord Saul, Your Excellency Saul. There were several true wizards and some high-ranking apprentices. My lord, the tree growth spell collapsed suddenly, and oh heavens, is that Lord Kent? The wizards gasped and rushed toward Kent's corpse. Don't go near it, Saul barked sharply. Kent was afflicted with an unknown pollution. Do not approach recklessly. The apprentices stopped, but one of the wizards didn't listen. He lunged to Kent's body. Though he avoided touching Kent's head, mindful of potential pollution, he still began casting detection magic to examine the body, perhaps to determine the cause of death. Another wizard stepped forward, face grim, and spoke respectfully to Saul. Your Excellency Saul, Lord Kent's death was sudden. We need to verify the cause of death. Saul sneered but didn't stop them. So you suspect I killed Kent? The wizard quickly denied it. Not at all. It's just Lord Kent was responsible for the cleaners. If we don't clarify his death, we won't be able to report to the dean. A sudden scream interrupted him. Everyone looked over to see the wizard examining Kent's body, screaming and collapsing. His eyes exploded, but he was worse off than Morden. After his eyes burst, the top half of his skull became a bloody mess. A third-rank apprentice, seemingly close to the injured wizard, instinctively cast a healing spell. A soft light bathed the wizard's face, and at last his cries of pain ceased. But as the light faded, the others all gasped. The wizard's face had grown over a dozen eyes. It was as if, when healing the wound, his muscle memory expected that his face was supposed to have that many eyes. The apprentice who cast the healing spell was so startled, he stumbled back 3 steps, as if afraid his own face would start growing eyes too. Saul sighed in apparent resignation. The pollution Kent suffered was terrifying and contagious. One of my own was killed. That's why I told you not to approach. The wizards across from Saul now looked a bit embarrassed. They had insisted on checking Kent's body, partly out of suspicion toward Saul. Suddenly, the entire room shook violently. Bottles and jars on the shelves shattered across the floor. An earthquake. One wizard pulled out an instrument and checked its readings. No, it's not an earthquake. Saul wasn't sure what was happening either. He immediately expanded his mental field, but found no strange magical fluctuations around them. Then the room shook again, this time even more violently. It's not an earthquake, Saul said as he looked out the window toward the distant buildings. It's just our building shaking. There's something underground. He and Agu exchanged a glance. Underground. Chapter 496, Devour. The eerie flower retreated swiftly along the outer wall of the tall building. 8 spider legs stretched out from Anne's back, their tips sharp as blades, stabbing deeply into the vines, only to be dragged downward. On the ground, a few members of the security squad remained. When they saw the man-sized flower crawling downward using its vines as limbs, they immediately raised the iron rod-like magical tools in their hands and aimed at the enormous blossom. However, before they could unleash the lesser flame orbs embedded in their tools, they noticed a woman clinging to the flower's stalk. As the two got closer, they were even more stunned to see that the woman had 8 spider legs protruding from her lower body. For a moment, the security squad didn't know whether to point their rods at the grotesque flower or at the strange woman behind it. The giant flower didn't even spare them a glance. From the fourth floor, it suddenly leapt into the air, its vines casually skewering several unfortunate souls. Amidst the cries of panic, it dove into a nearby underground drainage entrance, leaving a trail of blood behind. The entrance was narrow, blocked by railings. While the slender stem slipped through, the massive flower head couldn't fit. The creature instantly abandoned the floral portion of its body. It was left stuck outside the sewer entrance, leaving behind huge, blood-stained petals like shattered doors. And saw the blocked passageway. Though she could use magic to cut through the railings, it was clearly only a pipe inlet, narrow within as well. Even if she broke the bars, there was no way to expand the entire tunnel's diameter. A flicker of fierceness lit up her eyes. She directly abandoned her body and entered soul form, slipping in after it. This was actually extremely risky. After all, she wasn't in complete soul form. All of her energy came from Saul's support. But Anne could no longer afford to care. Not long ago, she and Saul were attacked by unknown roots during a trip. She was nearly dragged underground, just as her body was halfway buried, and suddenly sensed a familiar aura from the plant attacking her. That aura was like a trace of mint in salted fish, startling her into clarity, awakening the hazy memories from her fragmented soul fusion. Du Mo, and gritted her teeth and spat out the name. She pursued the fleeing vine downward, veering from the sewer halfway and diving into a fissure. She didn't know how far she chased, as she tunneled through the soil and suddenly felt herself pass through a kind of barrier, and everything ahead opened up. Open yet dark. She sensed an enormous object, dozens of meters ahead, blocking her path. It was vast and boundless, its ends lost in darkness. The vine she had been tracking leapt up onto the massive obstruction, and then drooped powerlessly, as if it had instantly gone from a living creature to a dead thing. The familiar aura she had been chasing vanished as well. Floating closer, and still couldn't discern what the colossal object was. She was only at its midsection, both top and bottom lost to the shadows, and its sides extended beyond sight. And struck the surface of the object with her hand, only to find it smooth as jade, yet impervious to her entry. Does it have some soul-repelling magic on it? She scrutinized the surface, but didn't sense any magical energy. Du Mo, why are you hiding in a place like this? The trail gone cold and grew anxious, knocking once more against the barrier. Suddenly, a dozen pale, root-like tendrils sprouted from the object's surface, wrapping tightly around her arms and yanking her inward. With the root's appearance, the familiar aura returned. Du Mo, is this all you're capable of now, skulking in the dark? Where? That boldness you had when you fought me for the heir's position in the family. The spider legs behind and blurred into motion, slashing hard. But despite their sharpness, they only managed to cut through the outer layer of the tendrils, failing to break free. She attacked again, this time lacing her strikes with corruption and erosion. After a few blows, she finally severed two tendrils and broke partially free. But before she could get away, several tendrils clustered together and formed a hand-like shape, grabbing her face and pulling her violently into the massive object. Her upper body vanished instantly, only her lower half still thrashing. Her 8 spider legs hammered against the giant object, trying to pull herself out, but to no avail. At that moment, a deep, oppressive voice echoed through the dark, chaotic space. You're still as foolish as ever. I left only a hint of bait, and you followed it like a rat. The smooth surface of the object rippled like water, revealing a male face. As the voice spoke, and struggled even more violently, her spider legs finally braced against the surface, and with a surge from her waist, she yanked her head out from inside. Du Mo, her face looked like melting wax, barely intact, but her features were still recognizable, twisted in a sneer. Ha ha ha, look at your disgusting face. You sacrificed our entire family to Baton for some baseless legend, and this is what you became. Not human, not ghost. The man's face twisted slightly. You always knew how to provoke me. It's your stupidity that enrages you. Though Anne was in soul form, her spirit was clearly damaged, her upper body beginning to dissolve. As she spoke, her facial features slid down her skin. Even in this state, she continued to mock Dumo. Baton sure favored you. Did they raise you as a monster? Did you hand that artifact over to them? Dumo's sculpted face trembled slightly, then slowly calmed. Do you want to know my story? Then merge with me. You'll understand everything. You'll see my choice was right, my dearest sister. More pale tendrils grew from the smooth surface, dodging the spider legs, wrapping around Anne's dissolving torso, digging deep into her soul and pulling her in. Pain flickered across Anne's face, but her mouth remained sharp. I'm not your sister. The moment you betrayed the Bloodrose family, you were excommunicated. Excommunicated, so be it. The Bloodrose bloodline is already dead. The face showed no care. But you're still my sister, my soul's other half. I need you. Only with you can we complete the greatest blood-flesh magic in Bloodrose history, soul-flesh fusion. And continued to struggle, her melting face now dripping to her neck. A voice came from her chest. Fusion, you just want to devour me. Don't say it like that. It's about becoming one. As her body was slowly pulled inside, the face smiled in delight. Sister, if you love the Bloodrose so much, I can rebuild it for you. Just come quietly. Her face was once again pressed against the giant surface and began to dissolve into it. Her voice came now from her abdomen. You betrayed the Bloodrose for a baseless legend. It doesn't need your resurrection. Go cling to your stupid hardbound book and rot. At the mention of the hardbound book, Dumo's face twisted again, his voice growing heavier. How unfortunate. That legend turned out to be false. What let me reach rank 4 was still our family's blood-flesh magic. No. What? The face was stunned. He looked downward. By now, most of Anne's body had been pulled in, the remainder too melted to resist. Where had that voice come from? I thought you were the barrier itself. Turns out, you're just a broken spirit being raised here. Dumo was horrified to realize the voice was coming from his own mouth. You, how is that possible? Did you really think I'd lost my mind to pollution, or been blinded by hatred? No, I let you devour me on purpose. Poor, foolish brother. How could you be so naive as to believe that once we merged, your consciousness would be the one to prevail? Background: the Bloodrose family was the original clan of the Bloodthorn family, destroyed centuries ago. One of Kismet's victims. The dead wizard's diary was accidentally sold to the Wizard Tower by a Bloodthorn descendant, and soul is largely sourced from the secret lab of Bloodthorn family head Ralph. Chapter 497, The Black Blade Shadow. Impossible! Dumo shouted in disbelief, his face twisted in fury. But just as he cried out, his expression shifted into a satisfied smile. Clearly, Anne's consciousness had already begun to influence his movements. Impossible! Dumo seized back control of his soul body again, but he could feel Anne slowly eroding the stronghold of his consciousness. Why, my soul body is clearly far stronger than yours. I even have Andesonia's help. The next moment, Dumo spoke in a completely different voice. So this is the inside of the inverted tree. What a massive tree, called Andesonia. What a strange name. Now Dumo was truly panicking. He realized his sister had already started accessing the memories within his consciousness. This can't be happening. I was supposed to devour you. That's why you shouldn't split your attention while studying, and still had the mood to joke. You forgot something important. Whether one consciousness can devour another isn't determined by the strength of its soul body, but by the stability of its awareness. But that only confused Dumo further. Of course my awareness is more stable. I died later than you. You're just a soul body driven by a lowly little wizard, and my master is." He cut himself off, clearly unwilling to reveal his master's identity. But even without Dumo saying it, and had already read it from within his consciousness. "So your master is a third-rank wizard. But Dumo, you're wrong again. The stability of a consciousness isn't completely dependent on the power of its master. What really matters is the preservation method. Clearly, this inverted tree Andersonia you're bound to is far inferior to the preservation vessel used by my master." Dumo didn't want to believe it, but he had no choice. Because as time passed, his sister had already read more and more of his memories, while he couldn't glimpse even a shred of her consciousness. At this rate, he truly would be completely devoured. "Master, master, please save me." Dumo cried out to the unknown existence. But after calling several times, no one answered. It's Dumo's fault. Dumo shouldn't have acted on his own. But Dumo only wanted to recapture his sister's soul body. "I didn't even lay a hand on that wizard. Please, for the sake of the century I've served you, save me." This time, the great tree finally reacted. Dozens of pale roots sprouted rapidly from its smooth, jade-like trunk and twisted around, aiming straight at the human face. As the roots pierced into the face, a male and a female voice screamed out from within. The man cried out in terror, begging for mercy. "No, master, no." The woman laughed wildly through the pain. "Ha ha ha, looks like your master has given up on you. That's fine, before you vanish I'll chew you up piece by piece." Those roots weren't here to save anyone. They were like sharp blades, shredding the two entangled soul bodies into pieces. What was more terrifying than pain was watching oneself slowly fade away. But Anne had no regrets. When she chased Dumo's bait into the underground, she already knew she might not return alive. But she had to go. This might be her last chance to avenge her people. If she let Dumo escape today for the sake of survival, she might never get another chance to kill a wraith with a third-rank wizard as its master. Though Anne firmly believed that Saul, who held the diary, would one day become a third-rank wizard, she couldn't be sure she'd survive until that day. A wizard's journey was never without danger. She could vanish during any expedition, just like the other lost black pages. So the bait Dumo laid was, in her eyes, far too tempting, a lure she couldn't resist. Even as she felt the inverted tree Andersonia's power eroding her soul, she never gave up her devouring of Dumo. Even if it meant death, obliteration, she would tear this bastard apart first. "Sorry, master," after devouring the final piece of Dumo's consciousness, and released her own defensive shell. Just as Dumo's voice was fading into silence, and Anne's awareness was collapsing under the tree's immense power, a black blade shadow suddenly condensed out of the void. It formed a shadowy slash and sliced at the roots from outside the tree at lightning speed. As the slash landed, the originally tenacious roots were severed in a single stroke. Then a transparent tendril reached into the tree's core and yanked out the near-shattered soul body. More roots extended from the vast trunk, so large their original form couldn't be seen. They stabbed toward the one who had snatched away their prey like arrows. Saul pulled back his hand, and the soul body gripped by the tendril instantly vanished. He didn't tangle with the roots. Saul still remembered the diary's warning, not to let any of those roots take even a fragment of him. So he turned and ran, still in soul form, soaring freely through the void. The severed roots quickly regenerated new tips, extending infinitely as they gave chase. Saul darted through layers of the massive mystical space formed by a grand magic formation and returned to the underground. The roots followed without hesitation. But just as they surfaced through the soil, another black blade shadow fell, cleanly severing the leading root. Then came a second slash, a third. The fierce, aggressive roots were cut up like vegetables, At last, the pursuing roots recoiled in fear and halted, no longer giving chase. Saul turned back and dismissed the blade shadow. This black blade shadow was the shadow soul blade that Saul had inherited from Jassem. The spell was incredibly mysterious. Its power couldn't be classified by the magic it contained, because the strength of the shadow soul blade depended on the caster's magic and mental power. And it was far stronger than Saul had anticipated, offering overwhelming offensive capability. Those pale roots, which had been nearly impossible to escape using other spells, were sliced apart like scallions under this spell. Because the knowledge of the Shadow Soul Blade had been directly projected into Saul's consciousness by Jassem, mastering it came easily. It took far less time than learning a normal third-rank spell. So once Saul confirmed the knowledge was safe, he quickly mastered it. If not for this spell, Saul might not have dared to risk saving it. When Saul returned to the surface, Agu immediately shielded him and guided him back into his meditating body. Before going to save En, Saul had returned to his room to pretend he was meditating. Now, as he opened his eyes again, the first thing he did was check the diary in his mind. Before entering the underground, the diary had warned him. If he was too slow, he'd be dragged back and eaten. That was why, after rescuing En, Saul hadn't stopped for even a moment as he fled. Now that he was back in his body, and the diary gave no new warnings and had closed again, it meant the crisis had passed. "Master." "She's back," Saul said coldly. Though he'd rescued En, that didn't mean he'd forgiven her for acting on her own. If she hadn't been a black page, one that had greatly helped Saul study magic and stayed loyal in past battles, then even with the diary's presence, Saul wouldn't have risked himself for her. Now that she was back, punishment was necessary. Otherwise, the other soul bodies might think the price of disobedience was too low and make the same mistake. "Master, I was wrong," and had just regained consciousness inside the diary and didn't try to justify anything. She admitted her mistake sincerely. But Saul ignored her. "Morden still outside?" "Yes, Master. A few official wizards from Baton Academy came by to take charge of the corpses outside. They're discussing how to transport them. Morden is guarding the door to make sure no one disturbs you." Chapter 498. Get out quickly. Saul pushed the door open and saw that the wizards outside were all people he knew. At the front stood none other than white-haired Julie. Saul raised his eyebrows. Wasn't she supposed to be secretly investigating the pollution source with Shea? Had their mission already ended? Julie looked a bit awkward when she saw Saul. She didn't come up to him like she used to, just gave a little wave as a greeting. Saul walked past the corpse, which had been isolated by a magical defense formation. "You're leading the team today." "Just happened to be free, so they called me in for overtime." Julie secretly winked at Saul. Another wizard who had once worked with Saul on a wraith-hunting mission came over. "Wizard Saul, could you describe again how Wizard Kent was contaminated?" Saul put on a cooperative look. "Of course. After Wizard Kent and I discovered that the pollution source might be on the rooftop, we came back here immediately. We arrived just in time to see a bizarre, giant flower already breaking through the rooftop's defensive formation and fighting with my two subordinates. There were also some humanoid figures made of black powder." Saul pointed to a pile of black ash that had stopped moving after its master died. After Wizard Kent killed those humanoid figures, he was about to chase the fleeing giant flower, but he had barely taken 2 steps when he suddenly froze. Then his head swelled to several times its normal size, covered in strange eyes. But the eyes didn't last long. They all exploded, turning him into what you see now. "And what were you doing at that moment?" "When Wizard Kent froze, I was fighting the other black humanoid smoke figures. Everything happened too fast. I didn't see exactly what occurred to Wizard Kent." Perhaps the Academy can investigate further. The questioning wizard looked at Saul with suspicion. He had a gut feeling that Saul might have been the one who got Kent killed. But he had no proof. Besides, Kent had shown up at Saul's place without notifying anyone, so it wasn't like Saul had lured him into a trap. And as an official mentor of the Academy, he also knew some of its secrets. He knew that the bizarre giant flower was likely something Kent had conjured himself, planting a monster in someone else's home, then enthusiastically helping to get rid of it. No matter how you looked at it, the intention wasn't pure. And Kent's reputation in Baton wasn't good enough for anyone to avenge him by confronting Saul. So, after a routine round of questioning, and with Saul being incredibly cooperative, the wizard simply recorded the events and left. Julie made a face at Saul and silently mouthed the words, "Serves him right." Saul wasn't sure how Kent had pissed Julie off this time. Judging from her expression, she wasn't happy. Seemed like she had just gone through something very unlucky. Could it be that she and Shea ran into something during their investigation? Saul thought to himself, but didn't pursue it further. Originally, he had wanted to investigate the pollution source to learn more about Caugus City and the secrets of Baton Academy, to see whether the city was worth staying in long term. But now, there was no need to dig any deeper. He was sure this place had serious problems. The ordinary people living here weren't here to work. They were the city's nourishment. Baton Academy's cleansing teams weren't assembled to protect the residents. They had turned the entire city into a giant petri dish. Though he didn't yet know what Baton was cultivating, based on the diary's warning, Saul was fairly certain that he himself was an extremely high-quality nutrient source. That's why the diary had warned him. Not even the tiniest bit of himself could be left behind. If the diary hadn't stopped issuing danger warnings, Saul would have already run far away by now. "By the way, with such a big scene today, didn't Shea come?" Saul asked, sounding casual. Mentioning Shea made Julie's expression even uglier. "Don't bring up that guy. He's good for nothing but running away." Saul raised his brows. Judging by Julie's reaction, could it be that during the investigation Shea ditched her and ran off alone? With his personality, that does seem likely. While Saul was chatting with Julie, someone else entered his room. It was Wizard Jonah, who almost never left the Academy. Jonah specialized in the dark element and had been called in to handle Kent's contaminated corpse. He entered without greeting anyone, crouched just outside the isolation formation, and stared at the unrecognizable remains of Kent. "These eyes are really strange. I've never seen this kind of pollution before. Did anyone witness Kent's transformation in full?" "Only Saul saw the whole process," Julie said, arms crossed. Jonah turned and finally noticed Saul standing beside her. He moved his lips as if muttering something, clearly unwilling. But after thinking for a moment, Jonah still walked over to Saul. "You saw the entire transformation." Saul nodded and repeated what he had witnessed. Jonah asked a few more questions, but they were all about the eyes. He didn't care why Kent was at Saul's place or what Saul had been doing at the time. "This is really strange. I've never seen anything like it." Jonah was visibly excited, tapping the ground with alternating feet. "But your servants are all dead. Why are you completely unharmed?" The room fell silent for a moment. Apparently, the others had been wondering the same thing, but hadn't dared to ask Saul directly. "I'm not sure either. Maybe it's because my mental strength is relatively high," Saul replied casually. Deep down, though, he suspected it had something to do with the stars surrounding his mental realm. "Let me see if there's any residual pollution on you," Jonah said, lifting both hands to rub his eyes. After a few seconds of rubbing, when he pulled his hands away, his eyes were now on his palms. He suddenly thrust his hands forward, stopping less than 3 centimeters from Saul's face. Saul didn't flinch, allowing the examination. After a few seconds, Jonah covered his face again and returned his eyes to their sockets. Only this time they were crooked, one vertical, one tilted. Can't see anything. Maybe your high mental strength really did protect you from Kent's pollution. Jonah staggered back to Kent's corpse, waved his hand, and said, "Call 2 guards, blindfold them, and have them carry the body out." A nearby apprentice hesitated. "Mentor Jonah, won't ordinary people get contaminated even if they're blindfolded? They might last longer, but—" Jonah waved him off. "Losing 2 regular folks is better than losing 2 wizard apprentices, don't you think?" The apprentice's face turned pale and nodded like a pecking chicken. "Yes, yes, you're absolutely right." Once the corpse was taken away, Jonah led the rest of the wizards out of Saul's room and advised him to move elsewhere. Saul agreed. On the way back to the academy, Jonah remained silent. Julie looked at him curiously, wanting to ask something, but Jonah refused to let her get within 3 meters of him. Ignoring Julie's constant eye-rolling, Jonah carefully tucked his hands into his robes and pressed them against his racing heart. "Damn it," he thought. "Why did I see even more eyes on Saul's body? No, I have to suggest to the dean that we get Saul out of Caugust immediately. If he stays any longer, this eye-related pollution could spread on a massive scale." Chapter 499, Kent's Compensation. While Jonah was still mulling over how to persuade the dean to quickly, but politely get Saul out of Caugust, Saul had already packed his things and was preparing to leave. He had forcibly retrieved and from within the inverted tree. Although the other party hadn't chased him to the surface, they had clearly marked him. On top of that, Saul had already taken care of Kent. Even if Baton Academy hadn't figured anything out yet, they would start suspecting him sooner or later. After all, the pollution on Kent was far too strange. In less than an hour, with the help of Agu and Morden, Saul had already sorted all the jars, containers, and various materials in his room, carefully categorizing them and packing everything into his storage device. As he left his temporary residence, Saul noticed someone watching him, but he paid it no mind and simply instructed Marsh to drive the carriage at a normal pace. When the carriage passed through the city gate, no one came forward to stop him. Saul even caught sight of that second-rank apprentice Doomer whom he had seen when entering the city. Through the semi-immersive state of his new meditation technique, Doomer's head still appeared as a surveillance dish to Saul. As he swept his gaze across the others, he noticed several more with the same problem as Doomer. At the entrance in the distance, a long line of people were still waiting to enter the city. They had no idea what kind of world they were about to step into. Tempted by high pay and a convenient life, perhaps even if they knew, they wouldn't care. Saul leaned out and looked behind him. Very few people were leaving the city. Even the wizards who had been keeping tabs on him stopped following once he was out of Caugust. Looks like they haven't noticed what happened with the inverted tree yet. Saul lowered the carriage window and pulled out a storage bag. Penny, who hadn't been much help in the earlier battle, finally had a chance to speak. "Brother Saul, did you actually steal Kent the Wizard's storage bag? Hee, you're getting bad." Only Penny dared to talk to Saul like that. Expressionless, Saul began deciphering the encoded formula on the bag. "This isn't stealing. Kent deliberately set an ambush in my room and blasted a huge hole in my ceiling. This is called compensation." Yes, that Kent isn't a good guy at all. He was probably trying to steal from you when he set that trap. I say he's the real thief boss." Penny giggled and landed on Saul's shoulder, curious to see just how much loot Baton Academy's so-called thief boss had. "Don't get your hopes up. Kent has long-term accommodations at Baton Academy. He probably wouldn't carry much with him while traveling, maybe just some tools or materials useful in battle." The bag's anti-crack protections weren't very strong. It used spatial magic to compress a larger space into a smaller volume. Its main weakness was that this spatial compression could easily be destabilized, causing the compressed space to revert to its original form. With the right methods, anyone could disrupt the balance and cause its contents to spill out. So keeping your bag well hidden was usually much safer than simply locking it with a few magical seals. It didn't take Saul long to break Kent's storage bag. By then, the carriage had already left Caugust far behind. The grayish-white city walls and towering buildings had faded into the backdrop beyond the forest. This Kent wizard is dirt poor. Penny leaned in, took one look, and sighed in disappointment. Though she had expected Kent wouldn't be carrying his full fortune while traveling, she hadn't expected it to be this little. Unbothered, Saul first pulled out the magic crystals and swept them with his spirit. Not even 100. He then pulled out a few pieces of parchment, not spells, but rather a deconstruction diagram of a magical formation. There were no annotations on it, so Saul couldn't tell what it was for. He handed the parchment to Agu sitting across from him. Agu flipped through it twice and said hesitantly, "Might be a summoning-type formation." "Summon what?" Saul asked curiously. I can't tell yet, but we could try activating the formation sometime. As long as we stop before the final step, we might get an idea of what it's meant to summon." "Could it be Greatwood Growth?" Saul asked, somewhat expectantly. Dean Pond's Greatwood Growth was impressively powerful. Just standing near the branches was enough for Saul to feel immense pressure. If he hadn't attacked Kent first, it might have been a tough fight. "It doesn't look as complex as a fourth-rank spell, but it's possible the real runes are hidden." Saul chuckled, hearing the hint of consolation in Agu's words. He looked through the remaining contents of Kent's bag, just some fairly common magical materials. "Even though I knew he wouldn't bring much, this is way too little." Penny was clearly unsatisfied. "Well, it shows that the materials I offered in exchange for that wraith were pretty tempting. Kent may have attacked me partly because of them. I'll need to be more cautious moving forward." "Sigh, brother Saul, you can't really blame yourself. Who would have thought people out here were this poor?" Penny, already bored, phased through the carriage wall, wanting to fly outside for a bit. But she'd barely been out for 2 seconds before she zipped right back into the carriage. "Brother Saul." SHH. Saul raised a finger to his lips. The moment Penny slipped back in, he felt it too. Something was trailing the carriage quietly. It exuded faint spiritual energy, lurking underground, matching the carriage's speed and slowly drawing closer. "Little Algie," Saul ordered calmly. A black, tentacle-like vine shot out from the window and vanished into the ground. The carriage didn't stop, and had barely gone 3 to 5 more meters before the sounds of metal clashing rang out from behind them. Saul was just about to transform into his octopus form to help little Algie, when he sensed the spiritual energy catching up and paused, reverting to his human form before jumping off the carriage. Wizard Shea. Saul recognized the familiar spiritual fluctuations. But to his surprise, the thing battling little Algie wasn't a wizard. It was those pale root tendrils that had attacked them several times before, and that Saul had just provoked again. Only this time, the number of tendrils far exceeded anything he had encountered before, dense as a field of young shoots. Little Algie was locked in fierce combat with the foremost tendrils. The tendrils relied on entanglement. Little Algie fought back with its bite. Even though it could split itself, it was gradually being overwhelmed by the sheer number of roots. "Shea, is that you?" Saul raised a hand, and a black blade formed swiftly above his head. The dozen or so roots at the very front halted their attack, clustered together, and raised their tips skyward, almost like someone standing upright. The other tendrils hovered in midair, seemingly confused, and didn't attack right away. The ones that stopped first twisted together and slowly formed a humanoid shape. Saul kept his black blade suspended and stepped closer. Were you swallowed by the inverted tree? The humanoid figure made of roots sprouted a new branch, forming something like a mouth. Damn it, too late to run. Never before had Wizard Shea cursed out loud. And the fact that those words came from his mouth now, full of bitterness and frustration, spoke volumes. Chapter 500, The Deal. What are you doing here? Want to fight me again? Saul had no mood for sympathy at the moment. He was still wary of the roots that made up Shea's body, but to his surprise, Shea didn't shy away and directly stated his purpose. I was ordered to only pretend to pursue you. During the battle, I was to seize a fragment of your soul body. Interested in my soul body? Saul thought of something but didn't let it show. He only replied casually, "You're directly telling me what you were supposed to do secretly. What's your aim?" The roots behind Shea suddenly spread out slightly, and one root approached. Its tip began to swell and vaguely took on a human form, with visible head and facial features. Two forked tendrils transformed into the shape of arms. He looked much more like how Wizard Shea used to appear. I used to prepare a lot of escape plans, but I also considered, what if one day I were resurrected and became a ghost enslaved by someone else? You bastard! Saul hadn't expected Shea to have made so many backup plans for himself. If I died outright, all of it would have been meaningless. But the current situation proves my preparations were thorough. I have my own methods to maintain my soul's independence. I won't be easily controlled by others, and even if I'm deceived, I can find a way to recover. Shea raised the two arms formed of roots. It's just that now I'm trapped within this plant's roots. If I hadn't come out to chase you, you probably wouldn't have been able to escape the restraint. He lowered his hands and looked at Saul. In his wooden, expressionless eyes, there was a faint trace of eagerness. I've long noticed the servants around you. The static fields on their bodies are off. They're actually all dead bodies inhabited by souls, aren't they? I want the method you use to transfer soul bodies into other corpses. Saul was a bit surprised at Shea's sharpness. Given his cautious nature and endless array of tactics, if not for the power of the inverted tree, Shea probably wouldn't have ended up like this. What do you have to trade? I'll let you leave unscathed. Saul curled his lip. You don't think that without your permission I couldn't leave anyway, do you? Shea paused. Looking at Saul's calm and indifferent expression, he began to waver. Though the two had performed a few sweeper missions together, Saul always maintained a restrained, peaceful demeanor, as if no one had ever forced him to reveal his true strength. Shea didn't believe that a first-rank wizard could escape unscathed from the multitude of roots, but if they truly fought, their agreement might fall through entirely. I don't have much to offer in my current state, but do you want to know the secret of Baton Academy? Saul was indeed a bit curious about Baton Academy's secrets, and just as he was hesitating whether to get the information from Shea, the diary suddenly flipped open to Anne's page. Master, because she knew she had done something wrong, Anne's handwriting looked particularly cautious. I know some things about the inverted tree Andasonia, and probably more than Wizard Shea does. And knows, Saul thought, looks like her time inside the tree wasn't for nothing. Then he changed the topic. You mean Andasonia? I actually know a few things too. That completely stunned Shea. It wasn't strange for Saul to know the tree's name. Some who knew surface-level information also called it that. But Andasonia was the true name of the inverted tree in the field of magic. It represented the essence of this magical creature, a name the average person had no way of knowing. Shea himself only learned it after being imprisoned deep inside the tree. So how did Saul know? Could it be that his mentor had once taught him this knowledge? Shea didn't dwell on the question too long. He didn't have much time left. If the tree's owner noticed something was off, it could easily pull him back and send another soul in his place. Then he'd get nothing. With that in mind, Shea softened his tone and no longer held himself so stiffly. I have a backup residence by the sea. It's very well hidden. Inside, I've stored all the wraiths I've collected and traded over the years. I know you specialize in dark elements and are gathering wraiths. If you teach me how to allow a soul body to move freely in a corpse, I'll tell you where the storage is. Having said that, even though he had no heart, Shea felt a twinge of pain in his chest. That was his years of savings. He really shouldn't have stored all his wraiths in a single underground chamber. Now he had to hand it over all at once. Saul's eyes lit up at that. Was this guy a hoarder? That was a ridiculous amount of stockpile. From the faint wrinkles on Shea's face, Saul could tell there were probably a lot of wraiths. And whether it was for building soul-based equipment or re-establishing his own wizard tower, Saul needed large quantities of soul bodies. Then we have a deal. Saul wasn't greedy. Once he heard a satisfactory offer, he agreed. Shea sighed in relief. In his current state, there weren't many people he could make a deal with. Fortunately, the ferry contract between him and Saul hadn't expired yet. Otherwise, they'd have to waste a lot of effort figuring out how to ensure the transaction was fair and without deceit. Once the oath was made, Saul generously recited the formula for a potion that delays soul rejection. Shea had to memorize it mentally. He didn't dare write it down on any medium, fearing the tree's owner might detect it. After memorizing it painfully several times and confirming he wouldn't forget it soon, Shea looked up and said to Saul, "Now let's fight." Saul smiled slightly. The black blade condensed above his head slashed down without hesitation, instantly severing one of Shea's arms and several of the roots beside him. Though the two had come to an agreement in the lower hierarchy of the inverted tree, they had to pretend they had tried their best to battle Saul, only to retreat when overpowered. But Saul didn't bother with the pretense, smiling one moment and flipping the table the next, even if it was just for show. Wasn't that strike a bit too much? Still, it was too late to complain. Shea could only scowl and direct the mass of roots behind him to attack Saul and his carriage from 3 sides. If I can't steal your soul body, I'll at least take something from you. Otherwise, how can I prove I gave my all in the pursuit? With that thought, Shea commanded the roots to attack even more fiercely. So when An and I were attacked back then, the roots ignored me and only targeted her because someone was directing them. Ever since he rescued An, he hadn't had the time to ask her why she snuck underground or what happened inside the inverted tree. Now it seemed she had mostly recovered. It was time to properly interrogate her. While fighting, Saul retreated toward the carriage. His carriage had already activated its defensive formation, but under the intense assault of the roots, it wouldn't hold for long. The coachman Marsh curled up on the driver's seat, hugging his head, with the mushroom on his head trembling. Strangely enough, the roots didn't attack him either, as if they truly mistook him for a mushroom. Saul controlled the dark soul blade and sliced through the approaching roots with several swipes. Agu assisted from inside with spells like Slickness, which weren't powerful but used clever angles to evade attacks. Little Algae had been fighting the roots from the start. Now it was entangled in a messy brawl, but looked more like a bundle of weeds than anything fearsome. When most of the roots were cut down, and Shea still hadn't managed to injure Saul's side, he became frustrated and finally understood why Saul didn't fear his threats. With the Dark Soul Blade, Saul was practically a natural enemy of plant-based creatures. In the end, Shea could only watch helplessly as Saul left, seething with rage. As if their transaction had never happened at all.